In the sprawling citadel where the winds from the Hellespont carried the salt tang of distant seas, the royal palace of Troy stood as a testament to divine favour and mortal ambition. Within these walls of fitted stone, adorned with bronze reliefs depicting the exploits of heroes and the blessings of immortals, King Priam ruled over the most prosperous realm in all of Asia Minor. His bloodline stretched back through generations of kings who had shaped the destiny of the Troad, each adding their own chapter to the epic of Trojan supremacy. Priam himself descended from the legendary Dardanus, son of Zeus, who had founded the first settlement on the slopes of Mount Ida. Through Dardanus came Erichthonius, whose horses were so swift they could run across fields of grain without bending the stalks, and from him descended Tros, the eponymous founder of the Trojan people. The royal genealogy continued through Aeolus, who established the great city itself after following a divine cow to the spot where it lay down, and then to Laomedon, Priam's father, whose reign had been marked by both divine favour and the terrible consequences of breaking oaths with the gods. This weight of ancestry pressed upon every child born within the palace walls, but none more so than those who emerged bearing the unmistakable marks of divine attention. When Queen Hecuba, daughter of the Phrygian king Demas, felt the first stirrings of labour in the depths of winter, the court seers had already proclaimed that momentous births awaited the royal house. Hecuba herself carried the blood of river gods and mountain spirits, her lineage tracing back to the nymph Evagora and the ancient kings of Phrygia, whose realm bordered Troy's eastern territories. The queen's labour began during the darkest hours before dawn, when the constellation of the twins hung directly overhead, their celestial presence casting an ethereal glow through the high windows of the birthing chamber. The royal midwives, skilled women who had delivered princes and princesses for 3 generations, recognised the significance of this timing immediately. Twin births among royalty were rare enough, but when they occurred under such auspicious stellar alignments, they invariably heralded children marked by the gods for extraordinary destinies. Helenus emerged first, his arrival announced by a cry that the attending priest declared remarkably melodious for a newborn. The infant prince bore upon his tiny forehead a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon, which the court augurs interpreted as a sign of Apollo's favour. Before the midwives had even finished tending to the firstborn, Hecuba's contractions resumed with renewed intensity, and within the span of a single hour Cassandra followed her twin brother into the world. The princess's birth was accompanied by phenomena that would be discussed in hushed whispers throughout the palace for years to come. As she drew her first breath, every lamp and brazier in the birthing chamber flared with unusual brightness, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The attending women later swore that they heard the distant sound of lyres playing, though no musicians were present in that part of the palace. Most remarkably, a white dove, sacred to Aphrodite, somehow found its way into the sealed chamber and perched upon the windowsill, remaining there throughout the remainder of the birth proceedings. The twins' physical resemblance was immediately apparent, both possessing the distinctive features of their royal lineage: the high cheekbones of the Dardanian kings, the deep-set eyes that seemed to hold flecks of gold in their depths, and the thick, dark hair that marked them as true children of Priam. Yet even in infancy, subtle differences distinguished them. Helenus possessed a calm, contemplative demeanour, rarely crying and seeming to observe his surroundings with unusual intensity for one so young. Cassandra, by contrast, displayed a restless energy that kept her nurses constantly vigilant, her dark eyes darting about as if tracking movements invisible to others. The significance of twin prophets in the ancient world extended far beyond mere familial bonds. Throughout the Mediterranean cultures, twins were understood to share a connection that transcended the physical realm. Their souls intertwined in ways that allowed them to perceive truths hidden from ordinary mortals. The oracle at Delphi had long proclaimed that when twin seers were born to royal blood, they would serve as conduits for divine will. their combined insights capable of revealing the threads of fate itself. Yet the nature of their prophetic gifts would prove fundamentally different, as if the gods had divided a single overwhelming power between them to prevent any mortal from wielding too much divine knowledge. Helenus would receive visions that brought hope and guidance, his prophecies serving to illuminate paths toward favourable outcomes and divine blessing. His words would be welcomed by kings and generals, his counsel sought in matters of war and diplomacy. Cassandra's gift, however, would carry a far more terrible burden, one that would transform divine favour into an unbearable curse. During their early years, both children displayed behaviours that set them apart from their numerous siblings. The royal household of Troy was vast, with Priam ultimately fathering 50 sons and 50 daughters through various wives and concubines. Yet none of the other children exhibited the peculiar sensitivities that mark the twins. They would often be found standing together in the palace gardens, their heads tilted as if listening to voices that no one else could hear. Palace servants reported seeing them engaged in animated conversations with seemingly empty air, their expressions serious and intent as if receiving important instructions. The political climate of Troy during Cassandra's youth was one of unprecedented prosperity and influence. The city commanded the crucial waterway between Europe and Asia, extracting tribute from merchant vessels that sought passage through the Dardanelles. Trojan ships carried goods from the Black Sea colonies to markets throughout the Mediterranean, while the city's strategic position made it an essential ally for kingdoms seeking to project power across the region. Priam's court welcomed ambassadors from Egypt to Syria and the Greek city-states, all eager to maintain favourable relations with the wealthy Trojan monarchy. This economic success was matched by the city's religious prominence. Troy served as a major centre for the worship of several important deities, most notably Apollo, whose temple complex on the citadel rivaled those found in Delphi or Didyma. The god of prophecy, music and healing had long shown special favour to the Trojan royal house, granting them victories in battle and prosperity in peace. The annual festivals celebrating Apollo's protection drew pilgrims from across Asia Minor, filling the city's coffers while reinforcing Troy's reputation as a divinely blessed realm. The goddess Athena also maintained a significant presence in Troy, her ancient wooden statue, the Palladium, serving as the city's most sacred protector. Legend held that this image had fallen from heaven during the reign of Ilus, and its continued presence within the city guaranteed Troy's invincibility. The Temple of Athena, with its massive columns carved from local limestone and decorated with bronze reliefs depicting the goddess's victories, dominated the highest point of the citadel, visible to ships approaching from the sea. The religious atmosphere of the palace itself was suffused with divine presence. Daily sacrifices were offered at multiple altars throughout the complex, their smoke rising in carefully interpreted patterns that the court priests read for signs of divine favour or displeasure. The royal children were raised in an environment where the boundary between mortal and divine was gossamer thin, where dreams might carry messages from Olympus, and where unusual occurrences were immediately analysed for their prophetic significance. Within this charged atmosphere, Cassandra and Helenus began to display their extraordinary gifts at a remarkably early age. Palace records, meticulously kept by the court scribes, document incidents beginning when the twins were barely 3 years old. Helenus correctly predicted the arrival of an important delegation from the Hittite Empire 3 days before any messenger could have reached Troy with advance notice. Cassandra, meanwhile, began experiencing what the court physicians initially dismissed as childhood nightmares, but which gradually revealed themselves to be visions of future events. The twins' supernatural abilities became impossible to ignore when they simultaneously warned of a fire that would threaten the palace's eastern wing. Their urgent insistence that the royal treasures be moved from that section of the building initially met with skepticism. But when lightning struck the building 2 days later, igniting a blaze that consumed exactly the areas they had identified, Even the most skeptical courtiers began to acknowledge their prophetic powers. The divine favour surrounding the royal children extended beyond mere prophecy. Both twins demonstrated an unusual affinity for animals, with wild creatures showing no fear in their presence. Wolves from Mount Ida would approach them in the palace gardens, lowering their heads in apparent submission, while eagles would perch on the palace walls whenever the children ventured onto the terraces. Most remarkably, serpents, sacred to Apollo and traditionally viewed as harbingers of prophetic power, were frequently observed coiled peacefully near wherever the twins played or studied. These manifestations of divine attention did not go unnoticed by the priests of Apollo's temple, who began to interpret the signs according to ancient precedents. The god of prophecy was known to mark his chosen servants from birth, often through dreams, visions, or supernatural encounters with his sacred animals. The presence of serpents was particularly significant, as these creatures were believed to possess the ability to whisper divine secrets to those pure enough to understand their language. The court augurs, learned men who had studied the ancient texts and traditions passed down from the earliest days of Troy, recognized that the twins represented something unprecedented in the city's history. While individual prophets had occasionally emerged from the royal bloodline, never before had two siblings simultaneously manifested such powerful gifts. The implications for Troy's future seemed boundless, suggesting that the gods intended the city to play an even more significant role in the unfolding drama of the ancient world. As Cassandra and Helenus grew from infancy into childhood, their prophetic abilities continued to develop and strengthen. The palace became accustomed to their strange pronouncements and uncanny insights, though the full weight of their destiny remained hidden even from the most learned seers. The twins themselves seemed to sense that their gifts carried responsibilities that would eventually transform not only their own lives but the fate of Troy itself, though the precise nature of that transformation remained shrouded in the mystery that surrounded all divine interventions in mortal affairs. The years that followed Cassandra's remarkable childhood were marked by an intensification of the divine attention that would ultimately reshape her destiny. As she matured from a precocious child into a young woman of extraordinary beauty, the signs of supernatural favour that had surrounded her birth began to manifest in increasingly dramatic ways. The palace servants whispered of how sunlight seemed to follow her through the corridors, casting an unusual golden radiance that made the bronze fittings and marble columns gleam with enhanced brilliance. Her very presence appeared to invigorate the sacred groves surrounding Apollo's temple, where laurel trees bloomed out of season and spring water ran clearer when she walked nearby. By her 16th year, Cassandra had developed into a figure of striking presence within the Trojan court. Her features had refined into the classical beauty prized throughout the ancient world, high cheekbones that caught the light, creating delicate shadows beneath her dark eyes, and thick hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, so dark it appeared almost blue-black in certain illumination. Her movements possessed an unconscious grace that drew attention without apparent effort, whether she was participating in religious ceremonies or simply crossing the palace courtyards. The traditional chiton she wore, dyed in the deep purple reserved for royal blood, enhanced her natural colouring and emphasised her tall, slender frame. More significantly, her prophetic abilities had evolved far beyond the childhood visions that had first marked her as divinely gifted. Where once she had experienced fragmentary glimpses of future events, she now received complex revelations that revealed intricate patterns of cause and effect extending across months or even years. Her predictions had proven accurate with disturbing consistency, earning her a reputation that extended beyond Troy's walls to the courts of neighbouring kingdoms. Merchants and diplomats specifically requested audiences with the prophetic princess, seeking insights that might guide their commercial ventures or political negotiations. The god Apollo had been observing this remarkable development with growing fascination. From his golden throne on Mount Olympus, the deity who governed prophecy, music, and the arts had watched Cassandra's gifts unfold with the keen interest of a master craftsman observing the perfection of his finest work. Her natural aptitude for divination exceeded that of even his most accomplished priestesses at Delphi, while her beauty rivaled that of the nymphs who served in his sacred groves. The combination proved irresistible to a god whose passions were as legendary as his divine powers. Apollo's initial attraction to mortals typically followed predictable patterns. The god would observe a particularly beautiful or talented individual, become consumed with desire, and pursue his object of affection with the single-minded determination that characterized divine obsession. His previous conquests included the nymph Daphne, who had transformed herself into a laurel tree to escape his advances, and Coronis, whose infidelity had provoked his terrible vengeance. Yet his interest in Cassandra represented something more complex than mere physical attraction or even appreciation for her prophetic gifts. The god found himself genuinely intrigued by her character, which displayed an independence of spirit unusual among mortals who possessed supernatural abilities. Most seers became overwhelmed by their gifts, either retreating into mystical isolation or allowing themselves to be consumed by the burden of constant revelation. Cassandra, however, had learned to integrate her prophetic visions into her daily existence without losing her essential humanity. She continued to participate fully in court life, offering counsel to her father on matters of state, engaging in the intellectual discussions that characterized Trojan royal culture, and maintaining close relationships with her siblings, despite the supernatural gulf that separated her from ordinary mortals. This balance between divine gift and human nature created a paradox that Apollo found increasingly compelling. Here was a mortal who possessed abilities that approached his own prophetic powers, yet who remained grounded in the material world in ways that even his immortal priestesses could not match. Her insights into human nature were as acute as her visions of future events, allowing her to navigate the complex political currents of Priam's court with remarkable skill. She understood the motivations that drove kings and merchants, warriors and priests, displaying a wisdom that seemed to transcend her relatively young age. The god's fascination deepened as he observed her interactions with the sacred animals that continued to seek her presence. Unlike other mortals blessed with supernatural gifts, Cassandra showed no fear or excessive reverence when confronted with divine manifestations. When eagles landed on the palace walls during her walks, she acknowledged them with calm dignity rather than prostrating herself in terror. When serpents emerged from the temple precincts to coil peacefully at her feet, she regarded them with respectful attention rather than the hysterical devotion that characterized most encounters between mortals and sacred creatures. Apollo's decision to pursue Cassandra directly rather than through dreams or visions represented a significant departure from his usual methods of divine courtship. The god typically preferred to approach mortals in disguised form, appearing as a handsome shepherd or travelling musician to test their character before revealing his true identity. With Cassandra, however, he chose to manifest in his full divine glory, perhaps recognizing that her prophetic abilities would make deception impossible, or simply acknowledging that she deserved the honour of witnessing his true form. The encounter took place within the sacred precinct of Apollo's temple, where Cassandra had come to offer the traditional monthly sacrifices required of royal children. The temple complex occupied the highest terrace of Troy's citadel, its marble columns rising 60 feet into the air and supporting a roof adorned with golden sculptures depicting the god's various triumphs. The inner sanctuary housed a magnificent chryselephantine statue of Apollo, crafted from ivory and gold by the finest artisans of the age, its eyes set with precious gems that seemed to follow visitors as they moved through the sacred space. Cassandra had completed the ritual offerings and was preparing to depart when the air within the sanctuary began to shimmer with an intensity that made the marble walls appear translucent. The golden decorations started to emit their own light, while the carved reliefs depicting Apollo's victories seemed to move with independent life. The temperature rose noticeably, though not uncomfortably, creating the sensation of standing in perfect sunlight even within the enclosed space of the temple. Apollo materialized gradually, his divine form taking shape like sunlight condensing into solid matter. He appeared as a young man of extraordinary beauty, tall and perfectly proportioned, with golden hair that seemed to contain actual light and eyes the colour of amber honey. His skin possessed the luminous quality that marked all the Olympian deities, appearing both perfectly human and clearly supernatural. He wore a simple chiton of white linen that somehow managed to suggest both casual elegance and divine authority, while a laurel crown rested upon his golden curls with natural grace. The god's voice, when he spoke, carried the melodic quality that had made him the patron of musicians throughout the ancient world. Each word resonated with harmonic overtones that seemed to vibrate through the marble columns and bronze fixtures of the temple, creating an acoustic effect that was both beautiful and unmistakably supernatural. His manner combined divine majesty with an approachability that immediately set Cassandra at ease, despite the overwhelming nature of finding herself in the presence of an Olympian deity. Apollo's initial words focused not on his attraction to her, but on his admiration for her prophetic abilities. He praised the accuracy of her visions and the wisdom she'd shown in interpreting divine signs, comparing her favourably to the most accomplished oracles in his service. This approach demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of Cassandra's character, recognising that she would respond more favourably to acknowledgement of her abilities than to simple flattery about her physical beauty. The god's courtship strategy revealed itself gradually as their conversation continued. Rather than demanding immediate submission to his desires, Apollo chose to engage Cassandra as an intellectual equal, discussing the nature of prophecy and the relationship between divine will and mortal agency. He explained how her natural gifts could be enhanced through direct divine intervention, describing prophetic abilities that would surpass anything previously granted to mortal seers. The power he offered would allow her to perceive not merely fragments of future events, but complete understanding of the causal relationships that shaped historical developments. The specific nature of Apollo's promises involved the bestowal of what the Greeks termed the divine pneuma, the sacred breath that carried prophetic inspiration directly from the gods to their chosen servants. This gift would eliminate the uncertainty and fragmentary nature of her current visions, replacing them with clear, comprehensive understanding of future events. She would be able to perceive the consequences of actions before they were taken, understand the hidden motivations that drove historical figures, and recognize the patterns of divine intervention that shaped mortal affairs. Beyond enhanced prophetic powers, Apollo offered Cassandra a form of immortality through eternal youth and beauty. While she would remain technically mortal, the divine breath would preserve her physical form in its current perfection, allowing her to serve as his oracle for centuries rather than the brief decades typically allotted to human seers. This gift would make her the most powerful prophetic figure in the ancient world, surpassing even the Pythia at Delphi in terms of both ability and longevity. The god's presentation of these offers was accompanied by demonstrations of his divine power that served both to validate his promises and to create an atmosphere of otherworldly beauty within the temple. The marble columns began to resonate with musical tones that created complex harmonies, while the golden decorations cast patterns of light that moved in rhythm with the divine music. Flowers materialized from thin air, filling the sanctuary with fragrances that seemed to carry emotional resonances, inducing feelings of peace, joy, and spiritual elevation. Cassandra's response to Apollo's courtship revealed the complexity of her character and the sophistication of her understanding of divine mortal relationships. Rather than immediately accepting or rejecting his offers, she engaged the god in detailed discussions about the implications of the gifts he proposed. Her questions demonstrated both her intelligence and her awareness of the potential consequences of divine favour, showing that she understood the burdens as well as the benefits of enhanced prophetic power. The princess inquired about the nature of the visions she would receive, particularly whether they would include events that could not be prevented or changed. This question revealed her understanding that prophecy often carried the burden of foreseeing tragedies without the power to alter their course. Apollo's response was characteristically ambiguous, explaining that the gift of prophecy was fundamentally about understanding divine will rather than changing predetermined outcomes. Their conversations extended over several meetings within the temple sanctuary, each encounter deepening both Apollo's attraction to Cassandra and her understanding of what acceptance of his gifts would entail. The god's persistence was matched by his patience, as he recognized that rushing her decision would likely result in rejection. Instead, he allowed her time to consider his offers, while continuing to demonstrate both his power and his genuine admiration for her existing abilities. The cultural context surrounding their interactions was crucial to understanding Cassandra's eventual decision. In the ancient world, divine attention was considered both an honor and a responsibility that extended beyond the individual to encompass their entire family and community. Acceptance of Apollo's gifts would not only transform her own life, but would also enhance Troy's status as a divinely favored city. The god's special relationship with the Trojan royal house would be strengthened, potentially providing protection and prosperity for generations to come. Cassandra's acceptance of Apollo's offer came after weeks of careful consideration and consultation with the sacred texts housed within the temple library. These ancient scrolls, written in the archaic script used by the earliest Trojan kings, contained detailed accounts of previous divine interventions in mortal affairs, including both the benefits and the dangers associated with accepting supernatural gifts. Her decision was informed by this research as well as by her own prophetic insights into the potential consequences of her choice. The ritual through which Apollo bestowed his gifts took place during the new moon, when the darkness would provide the most dramatic contrast to the divine illumination that accompanied the ceremony. The temple was prepared according to ancient protocols, with specific incense burned to create the proper spiritual atmosphere and sacred vessels arranged to channel divine energy effectively. Cassandra wore a specially consecrated chiton of pure white linen, her hair adorned with laurel leaves sacred to Apollo, while golden bracelets marked with prophetic symbols encircled her wrists. The actual bestowal of divine breath occurred through a ritual kiss, a practice that had ancient precedents in various mystery religions throughout the Mediterranean world. Apollo's divine pneuma was transferred directly to Cassandra through this intimate contact, the sacred breath carrying with it all the prophetic power he had promised. The physical sensation was described in later accounts as overwhelming, like being struck by lightning while simultaneously being filled with the warmth of perfect sunlight. The immediate effects of receiving Apollo's gift were both physical and spiritual. Cassandra experienced a dramatic expansion of her prophetic abilities, with visions becoming clearer, more detailed, and more comprehensive than anything she'd previously encountered. She could suddenly perceive the intricate web of causation that connected past, present, and future events, understanding how individual decisions would ripple through time to create historical consequences. The enhanced clarity of her supernatural sight was accompanied by physical changes that marked her as divinely transformed, including eyes that now held flecks of gold that seemed to move independently and a voice that carried harmonic overtones, reminiscent of Apollo's own divine speech. However, the moment of triumph quickly transformed into the beginning of her greatest trial. Having received the prophetic gifts she had been promised, Cassandra found herself confronting the full implications of what acceptance of Apollo's courtship would ultimately require. The god's expectations became clear as he moved to claim the physical relationship that he considered the natural conclusion of their divine compact. His assumption that the bestowal of gifts automatically granted him access to her person reflected the typical divine attitude toward mortal agency and consent. Cassandra's rejection of Apollo's advances at this crucial moment stemmed from multiple factors that revealed the depth of her character and the complexity of her moral reasoning. Her enhanced prophetic abilities had immediately revealed the true nature of divine-mortal relationships, showing her visions of other women who had been loved and abandoned by the gods, left to face the consequences of divine attention without ongoing protection or support. She saw the pattern of Apollo's previous relationships, understanding that his passion, however genuine in the moment, would inevitably fade as his attention turned to new objects of desire. More significantly, her new prophetic powers had shown her glimpses of Troy's future that made acceptance of a relationship with Apollo seem like a betrayal of her city and her family. The visions she received in those first moments after receiving the divine gift included fragmentary images of conflict and destruction that would somehow involve her prophetic abilities. While the complete picture remained unclear, she understood intuitively that maintaining her independence would be crucial to fulfilling whatever role the fates had assigned to her in Troy's destiny. The princess's refusal was delivered with the same dignity and intelligence that had characterized their previous interactions, but her words carried a finality that made clear her decision was irrevocable. She acknowledged the magnificence of his gifts, while explaining that acceptance of his physical advances would compromise her ability to serve both Troy and the divine will that had granted her such extraordinary abilities. Her reasoning demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between personal autonomy and prophetic responsibility that impressed even Apollo, despite his anger at her rejection. The god's reaction to Cassandra's spurning of his advances revealed both his divine nature and the terrible power that made the Olympian deities objects of both worship and fear throughout the ancient world. His initial response was disbelief, as few mortals had ever rejected divine favour once it had been offered, particularly after already receiving the promised gifts. This disbelief quickly transformed into a rage that caused the very foundations of the temple to tremble, while the golden decorations began to emit heat that made the air shimmer with dangerous intensity. Yet even in his fury, Apollo recognized that simply destroying Cassandra would waste the very qualities that had attracted him to her in the first place. Instead, his divine mind conceived a punishment that would preserve her prophetic abilities while ensuring that they became a source of torment rather than honor. The curse he pronounced would transform the gift of prophecy from a blessing into an unbearable burden, creating a fate that would serve as both revenge for her rejection and a warning to other mortals who might consider spurning divine attention. Apollo's punishment of Cassandra represented one of the most psychologically sophisticated acts of divine vengeance recorded in ancient mythology, demonstrating the god's intimate understanding of both prophetic power and human nature. Rather than simply destroying her abilities or inflicting physical harm, Apollo chose to corrupt the very gift he had bestowed, transforming divine favour into an instrument of perpetual torment. The curse he pronounced would allow Cassandra to retain her enhanced prophetic powers in their full magnitude, while ensuring that no mortal would ever believe her warnings, regardless of their accuracy or urgency. The specific wording of Apollo's curse revealed the calculated cruelty of his revenge. He declared that while Cassandra would continue to receive visions of future events with perfect clarity and comprehensive detail, her words would carry no persuasive power among mortals. Every prophecy she spoke would be dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, every warning ignored as the product of feminine hysteria or political manipulation. The divine breath that had enhanced her prophetic abilities was twisted to ensure that her voice, though carrying absolute truth, would inspire only skepticism and ridicule. This punishment operated on multiple levels of divine justice according to Apollo's reasoning. Since Cassandra had accepted his gifts while rejecting the relationship that should have accompanied them, she would experience the isolation that came from possessing knowledge that could not be shared effectively. the god ensured that her prophetic abilities would become a source of constant frustration rather than honour, as she would be forced to watch tragic events unfold despite having warned of their approach. Her enhanced perception of future consequences would make her acutely aware of the suffering that could be prevented if only her words carried credibility. The theological implications of Apollo's curse reflected the complex nature of divine justice in Greek religious thought. The god's action demonstrated his dual role as both bringer of enlightenment and agent of destruction, embodying the dangerous ambiguity that characterized many Olympian deities. Apollo's domain over prophecy meant that he controlled not only the gift of foresight, but also the crucial element of belief that made prophetic warnings effective. By severing the connection between truth and credibility, he created a punishment that was both perfectly just according to divine logic and utterly devastating in its human consequences. The curse also revealed Apollo's sophisticated understanding of the relationship between knowledge and power in mortal society. Prophetic abilities derive their value not merely from accuracy, but from their capacity to influence human behaviour and decision-making. A prophet whose warnings were consistently ignored possessed no real power despite having access to divine truth. Apollo's punishment ensured that Cassandra would experience the ultimate frustration of possessing perfect knowledge while being completely unable to act upon it effectively. The immediate effects of the curse became apparent within days of its pronouncement. When Cassandra attempted to warn the palace guards about a minor fire that would break out in the servants' quarters, her words were dismissed as attention-seeking behaviour despite her previous reputation for accuracy. The guards who had once listened respectfully to her prophetic insights now treated her predictions with casual indifference, even when the events she foretold occurred exactly as she had described them. The disconnect between her obvious accuracy and the universal disbelief her words inspired created a cognitive dissonance that affected everyone who interacted with her. The psychological impact of the curse on Cassandra herself proved even more devastating than Apollo had likely anticipated. The princess found herself trapped in a nightmare of foreknowledge, able to perceive approaching disasters while being powerless to prevent them through normal means of communication. Her enhanced prophetic abilities showed her not only what would happen, but also the specific words and actions that might prevent tragic outcomes, yet she remained unable to convey this information in ways that would inspire appropriate responses. The isolation created by the curse extended beyond simple disbelief to encompass a fundamental alteration in how others perceived Cassandra's character and mental state. The same intelligence and dignity that had once marked her as a remarkable individual now seemed to work against her, as observers interpreted her insistence on the truth of her visions as evidence of dangerous delusion. Her detailed descriptions of future events, which should have demonstrated her prophetic accuracy, were instead viewed as the elaborate fantasies of an unstable mind. This transformation in public perception occurred gradually but inexorably, as the curse worked to undermine every aspect of Cassandra's credibility. Palace courtiers who had previously sought her counsel began to avoid her company, uncomfortable with her persistent warnings about events they considered either impossible or irrelevant. Her own family members, including her twin brother Helenus, found themselves unable to take her prophecies seriously despite their intimate knowledge of her abilities and character. The curse's effects on Helenus provided particularly clear evidence of its supernatural nature, as the twin who shared Cassandra's prophetic gifts found himself inexplicably unable to support or validate her warnings. When both siblings received visions of the same future events, Helenus could speak of his insights and be heard with respect, while Cassandra's identical prophecies were dismissed as meaningless ravings. This disparity caused tremendous strain in their relationship, as Helenus struggled with the knowledge that his sister's predictions were accurate, while being unable to overcome the supernatural compulsion to disbelieve her words. The social implications of Cassandra's curse extended throughout Trojan society, affecting not only her personal relationships, but also her role within the broader political and religious structures of the city. As a member of the royal family blessed with prophetic abilities, she had previously served as an important advisor on matters of state policy and religious observance. The curse transformed her from a valued counsellor into a source of embarrassment for the royal household, as her public pronouncements about future events were increasingly viewed as evidence of mental instability that reflected poorly on the entire dynasty. King Priam's response to his daughter's condition revealed the complex dynamics of family loyalty and political necessity that governed royal households in the ancient world. While he maintained his paternal affection for Cassandra and continued to provide for her material needs, he could no longer rely on her prophetic insights for guidance in governmental affairs. The king found himself in the impossible position of knowing that his daughter possessed genuine prophetic abilities while being unable to act on her warnings due to the supernatural compulsion created by Apollo's curse. The religious establishment of Troy faced similar difficulties in dealing with Cassandra's transformed status. The priests of Apollo's temple, who had previously regarded her as a divinely favoured individual worthy of special respect, now struggled to reconcile their theological understanding of prophetic gifts with the obvious dysfunction of her current situation. Some interpreted her condition as evidence that she'd somehow offended the god and deserved her fate, while others recognized the supernatural nature of her curse while being powerless to counteract its effects. Comparison with other prophetic figures in Greek mythology illuminated the unique cruelty of Cassandra's punishment. The Cumaean Sibyl, one of Apollo's most famous oracles, had been granted longevity to match her prophetic service, but had forgotten to request eternal youth, resulting in a gradual physical deterioration that eventually reduced her to a voice in a bottle. While this fate was tragic, the Sibyl's prophecies retained their power to influence human behaviour throughout her extended existence. Her words continued to be sought by kings and heroes who recognized their divine authority despite her physical decline. The Pythia at Delphi represented another model of prophetic service that highlighted the exceptional nature of Cassandra's curse. These priestesses delivered Apollo's oracles in states of divine possession, speaking in cryptic verses that required interpretation by trained priests. While their prophecies were often ambiguous or difficult to understand, they were universally accepted as authentic communications from the god. The institutional framework surrounding the Delphic oracle ensured that the Pythia's words carried tremendous political and religious authority throughout the Greek world. Other mythological seers who experienced divine complications in their prophetic careers included Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, who had been granted extraordinary longevity and the ability to understand the speech of birds. Despite being blinded by the gods as punishment for witnessing Athena's bath, Tiresias retained the respect and credibility necessary to function effectively as a prophet. His warnings and insights were consistently taken seriously by the rulers and heroes who consulted him, allowing him to fulfill his prophetic role despite his physical disability. The prophet Calchas, who served the Greek forces during the Trojan War, provided another example of how prophetic abilities typically functioned in mythological narratives. His interpretations of divine signs and omens guided crucial strategic decisions throughout the conflict, with military leaders accepting his insights as authoritative communications from the gods. Even when his prophecies predicted unfavourable outcomes or demanded difficult sacrifices, they were received with the respect due to genuine divine revelation. Cassandra's situation differed fundamentally from these other prophetic figures because her curse specifically targeted the relationship between truth and belief that made prophecy effective as a social institution. While other seers might face physical suffering, social isolation, or personal tragedy as consequences of their gifts, they retained the ability to influence human behaviour through their prophetic pronouncements. Cassandra alone was condemned to possess perfect knowledge while being denied the credibility necessary to act upon it. The theological significance of this particular form of punishment reflected Apollo's sophisticated understanding of the mechanics of divine communication with mortals. The god recognized that prophecy functioned as a form of divine speech that required both accurate revelation and human acceptance to achieve its intended effects. By severing this connection, Apollo created a form of divine silence that was more terrible than the complete absence of prophetic ability, as it tormented both the prophet and those who might have benefited from her warnings. The curse also demonstrated the fundamental difference between divine and human concepts of justice. From Apollo's perspective, Cassandra's punishment was perfectly proportionate to her offense, as she had violated the implicit contract that should have governed their relationship. The god's logic suggested that since she had accepted his gifts while rejecting his person, she should experience the frustration of possessing divine abilities while being unable to use them for their intended purpose. From a human standpoint, however, the curse appeared monstrously disproportionate to Cassandra's actions. Her refusal of Apollo's advances, while disappointing to the god, represented a legitimate exercise of personal autonomy that should not have warranted such devastating consequences. The punishment seemed designed not merely to penalize her rejection, but to destroy her capacity for meaningful existence as a prophetic figure, transforming her divine gift into an instrument of perpetual torture. The broader implications of Apollo's curse extended beyond its immediate effects on Cassandra to encompass questions about the nature of divine authority and mortal agency in the ancient world. The god's ability to corrupt his own gifts revealed the absolute power that the Olympian deities wielded over human affairs, while his willingness to use this power for personal revenge demonstrated the dangerous unpredictability of divine favour. Mortals who sought divine blessing were forced to recognize that such gifts came with obligations and expectations that could not be safely ignored or rejected. The curse's operation also highlighted the complex relationship between knowledge and suffering that characterized much of Greek tragic literature. Cassandra's enhanced prophetic abilities allowed her to perceive not only future events, but also the chain of causation that would lead to them, creating a form of knowledge that was both comprehensive and unbearable. She could see exactly how different choices might prevent approaching disasters while being unable to communicate this information effectively to those who possessed the power to make such choices. This aspect of her punishment created a recursive cycle of frustration and despair, as each accurate prediction that was ignored reinforced both her isolation and her awareness of the suffering that could have been prevented. The curse ensured that Cassandra would experience not only the immediate pain of being disbelieved, but also the ongoing torment of watching preventable tragedies unfold exactly as she had foreseen them. The full weight of Cassandra's curse manifested itself most devastatingly in the visions that began consuming her consciousness with increasing frequency and intensity. Where once her prophetic abilities had provided glimpses of future possibilities that could be contemplated and analysed, Apollo's corrupted gift now delivered relentless streams of images depicting Troy's complete annihilation. The enhanced clarity that accompanied her divine punishment meant that every detail of the city's approaching destruction was revealed to her with photographic precision, from the specific stones that would crumble in the walls to the individual faces of citizens who would perish in the flames. Her first comprehensive vision of Troy's ultimate fate occurred during the spring festival, honouring Athena, as Cassandra stood among the crowd gathered in the goddess's temple precinct. The familiar sounds of celebration suddenly faded into an otherworldly silence, replaced by the thunderous crash of bronze-tipped battering rams striking the city's massive gates. She saw the great walls of Troy, those impregnable fortifications that had protected the city for generations, reduced to scattered rubble by siege engines of unprecedented size and sophistication. The limestone blocks that form the foundation, each weighing several tons and fitted together with masterful precision, lay shattered across the plain like broken teeth. The vision revealed the specific method of Troy's downfall with horrifying clarity. A massive wooden construction, fashioned in the shape of a horse and standing nearly 40 feet in height, dominated the scene outside the city gates. The structure was built from oak planks secured with bronze fittings, its surface painted with intricate decorations that made it appear as a magnificent offering to the gods. Hidden within its hollow belly, she could perceive the cramped forms of elite Greek warriors, their bronze armour dulled with lamp black to prevent reflective glints, their weapons wrapped in leather to muffle any sound that might betray their presence. Cassandra witnessed the passionate debates that would rage within Troy's council chambers regarding the fate of this mysterious offering. She saw her father Priam, his beard now white with age, standing before the assembled nobles as arguments erupted around him. Some councillors urged immediate destruction of the horse, recognizing the potential for deception, while others interpreted its appearance as a sign of Greek defeat and divine favour toward Troy. The princess observed the fatal decision that would seal the city's doom, as the majority vote favoured bringing the wooden construction within the walls as a trophy of victory. The vision continued with excruciating detail through the night that would witness Troy's final hours. She watched as the hidden warriors emerged from their concealment under cover of darkness, their bronze-soled sandals making barely audible scraping sounds against the wooden planks as they descended rope ladders to the city's paved streets. These men moved with the disciplined precision of elite soldiers, their faces blackened with soot, carrying short swords and daggers optimized for close-quarters combat within the narrow confines of urban warfare. The systematic destruction that followed unfolded before Cassandra's prophetic sight like a carefully choreographed military operation. The Greek infiltrators moved through predetermined routes towards strategic objectives. Their actions coordinated with external forces that had been waiting in concealment beyond the horizon. Signal fires blazed from Troy's highest towers as the hidden warriors seized control of the gates, their flames visible to the main Greek army that had been lurking behind the nearby islands of Tenedos and Imbros. Cassandra's enhanced prophetic abilities revealed not only the broad outline of Troy's destruction, but also the intimate personal tragedies that would accompany the city's fall. She witnessed the death of her brother Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, in single combat with the Greek champion Achilles. The vision showed Hector's bronze armour, polished to mirror brightness and decorated with silver inlays depicting scenes of divine protection, pierced by Achilles' spear thrust beneath the collarbone where the metal plates joined. The Trojan prince's final moments played out in agonizing detail, his life ebbing away on the dusty plain before the city walls, while his parents watched in horror from the battlements above. The prophetic images extended to encompass the fate of King Priam himself, revealing the precise circumstances of the aged monarch's death during Troy's final night. Cassandra saw her father seeking sanctuary at the altar of Zeus Herchaos, the sacred hearth that protected the royal household, his royal robes torn and stained with the blood of defenders who had died attempting to protect him. The vision showed Neoptolemus, Achilles' young son, approaching the altar with his sword already drawn, his bronze blade reflecting the flames that were consuming the palace around them. Her prophetic sight captured the moment of Priam's death with terrible precision, showing how the Greek warrior struck down the elderly king, despite the sanctuary of the sacred altar, violating the ancient laws that protected suppliants who sought divine protection. The blood that flowed from Priam's wounds pooled around the altar's marble base, mixing with the sacred oil that had been poured there during countless ceremonies honouring the household gods. This act of sacrilege would echo through the vision as one of the crimes that would later bring divine vengeance upon the Greek victors. Cassandra's visions also revealed the specific fate awaiting the women of Troy's royal household, including detailed glimpses of her own approaching doom. She saw herself dragged from Athena's temple, where she had sought sanctuary, her white chiton torn by rough hands as Greek soldiers violated the sacred space to claim their human prizes. The vision showed Agamemnon, the Greek commander, selecting her as his personal captive, his scarred hands reaching out to claim ownership of Apollo's former favourite. Her prophetic abilities revealed even the specific ship that would carry her to Mycenae, a black-hulled vessel with bronze-reinforced ram and 24 oars, its sail decorated with the image of a lion that served as Agamemnon's personal emblem. The comprehensive nature of these visions extended to encompass the fates of Troy's common citizens, revealing the systematic destruction that would accompany the city's military defeat. Cassandra witnessed families being separated as the victorious Greeks divided their human spoils, children torn from their mothers' arms to be sold in distant slave markets, elderly citizens abandoned to die amid the burning ruins of their homes. The vision showed the great marketplace where she'd walked countless times during her childhood. Its marble columns toppled and its bronze statues melted into shapeless lumps by the intense heat of the fires that would consume the commercial district. The prophetic images revealed the methodical looting that would strip Troy of its accumulated wealth, showing Greek soldiers carrying off golden vessels from the temples, bronze weapons from the armories, and precious textiles from the royal storerooms. She saw the famous Palladium, Athena's sacred image that guaranteed Troy's protection, being carefully removed from its shrine by Odysseus and Diomedes, their theft of this divine talisman sealing the city's fate more definitively than any military assault could achieve. Cassandra's attempts to communicate these visions to Troy's leadership began immediately after receiving them, but Apollo's curse ensured that her warnings would be dismissed with increasing vehemence. When she approached her father in his private chambers, describing in precise detail the wooden horse that would bring about the city's destruction, Priam listened with the patient indulgence typically shown to a beloved but troubled child. The king's response revealed the insidious nature of the curse, as he found himself unable to take her warning seriously despite his intimate knowledge of her prophetic accuracy in previous instances. The princess's attempts to warn the Trojan military commanders proved equally futile, though her descriptions of Greek tactical preparations were accurate enough to have saved the city if anyone had possessed the ability to believe her words. She approached Hector himself, describing the specific circumstances that would lead to his death and identifying the weaknesses in his armour that Achilles would exploit. The great warrior listened respectfully to his sister's concerns, but interpreted her warnings as expressions of sisterly anxiety rather than genuine prophetic insight. Cassandra's efforts to alert the priesthood about the coming violation of Troy's temples met with similar dismissal, despite the detailed accuracy of her descriptions of how Greek soldiers would desecrate sacred spaces throughout the city. The high priest of Apollo's temple, a man who had witnessed her prophetic abilities develop from childhood, found himself unable to accept her warnings about the specific acts of sacrilege that would accompany Troy's fall. The curse operated so effectively that even those who had direct experience of her prophetic accuracy became incapable of recognizing the truth of her current visions. The princess's warnings about Paris and Helen had begun years earlier, when her brother first encountered the Spartan queen during his diplomatic mission to Menelaus's court. Cassandra's prophetic abilities had immediately revealed the catastrophic consequences that would follow if Paris brought Helen to Troy, showing her visions of the 1,000 ships that would launch from Greek harbours in pursuit of the stolen queen. She had seen the 10-year siege that would follow, the gradual exhaustion of Troy's resources, and the ultimate breakthrough that would lead to the city's destruction. Her attempts to prevent Paris from pursuing Helen had included detailed descriptions of the judgment that had led to his fateful decision. Cassandra's visions revealed how her brother had been selected by Zeus to arbitrate a dispute between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite over which goddess possessed the greatest beauty. She described how each deity had offered him bribes to secure his favourable judgment, with Hera promising political power, Athena offering military victory, and Aphrodite pledging the love of the world's most beautiful woman. The prophetic images showed Cassandra exactly how Paris had chosen Aphrodite's offer, his decision motivated more by divine compulsion than personal preference, as the goddess of love had used her supernatural influence to cloud his judgment. She witnessed the moment when the golden apple inscribed for the fairest had been awarded to Aphrodite, setting in motion the chain of events that would ultimately destroy Troy. Her warnings about these divine machinations were dismissed as political maneuvering designed to influence royal policy regarding the succession. When Paris returned to Troy with Helen, Cassandra's public denunciation of their union created a scandal that reverberated throughout the royal court. Standing in the great hall where the Trojan nobility had gathered to welcome the prince's return, she proclaimed the destruction that would follow from harbouring Menelaus's stolen wife. Her description of the Greek alliance that was already forming included specific details about the ships being prepared in various harbours, the weapons being forged in preparation for war, and the diplomatic negotiations that were securing commitments from kingdoms throughout the Greek world. The accuracy of her predictions about the war's initial phases should have established her credibility, but Apollo's curse ensured that each fulfilled prophecy only reinforced the perception that she was suffering from delusions that occasionally coincided with reality. When the first Greek ships appeared on the horizon exactly as she had foretold, observers attributed her accuracy to lucky guessing rather than genuine prophetic insight. When the siege began with the precise tactical deployment she had described, military analysts dismissed her previous warnings as intelligent speculation rather than divine revelation. Cassandra's visions of individual fates extended beyond her immediate family to encompass the destinies of numerous figures who would play crucial roles in Troy's destruction. She witnessed the death of Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion, whose killing would drive the Greek champion to rejoin a conflict he had temporarily abandoned. The vision showed Patroclus wearing Achilles' distinctive armour, the bronze plates decorated with scenes of divine warfare, as he led the Myrmidons in a desperate assault against Hector's forces. Her prophetic sight revealed the specific moment when Hector's spear would penetrate the borrowed armour, finding the gap beneath the arm where the bronze plates overlapped imperfectly. She saw Patroclus fall to his knees in the dust of the battlefield, his life bleeding away while Greek and Trojan warriors fought over possession of his body. The vision continued to show how news of his death would reach Achilles, transforming the Greek hero's grief into a rage that would drive him to seek vengeance against Hector, regardless of the consequences. The prophecies regarding Achilles himself revealed the complex web of fate that surrounded the Greek champion, showing how his choice to avenge Patroclus would seal his own doom, even as it ensured Hector's death. Cassandra witnessed the divine armour that Hephaestus would forge for Achilles, its bronze surface decorated with intricate scenes depicting the cosmos itself, from the earth and sea to the constellations that governed human destiny. She saw how this magnificent panoply would protect Achilles through his final battles while simultaneously marking him for death, as the gods had decreed that his greatest triumph would also herald his approaching end. Her visions of Troy's final defenders revealed the gradual attrition that would weaken the city's resistance over the course of the prolonged siege. She witnessed the deaths of numerous Trojan heroes, each falling in circumstances that she described with prophetic accuracy to audiences who dismissed her warnings as morbid fantasizing. The death of Sarpedon, Zeus's son and leader of the Lycian allies, played out before her prophetic sight with agonizing detail, showing how Patroclus would strike down this divine offspring despite Zeus's desire to save his child from mortality. These visions of approaching doom created an unbearable psychological burden for Cassandra, as she was forced to watch the systematic destruction of everything she held dear while being powerless to prevent any aspect of the catastrophe. Her enhanced prophetic abilities meant that she experienced these future tragedies with the same emotional intensity as present realities, living through Troy's destruction repeatedly in her visions while simultaneously witnessing the daily life of a city whose inhabitants remained oblivious to their approaching fate. The decade-long siege of Troy transformed Cassandra from a tormented seer into the city's most tragic witness, her prophetic abilities reaching their fullest expression even as her warnings fell upon increasingly deaf ears. As Greek ships blackened the shoreline and siege towers rose against Troy's mighty walls, the princess found herself trapped between two forms of warfare: the physical assault upon her city and the psychological torment of watching preventable disasters unfold exactly as her visions had foretold. Her role during these years evolved from that of a dismissed oracle to something far more complex, a living chronicle of divine will whose very presence served as a constant reminder of Troy's approaching doom. The early months of the siege established patterns that would persist throughout the conflict. Each morning Cassandra would emerge from her chambers in the royal palace, her appearance gradually reflecting the strain of her supernatural burden. Her once lustrous dark hair had begun showing premature streaks of silver, while her eyes held a haunted quality that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable when they encountered her gaze. The golden flecks that Apollo's gift had placed in her irises seemed to move more rapidly now, as if reflecting the accelerated pace of prophetic visions that consumed her waking hours. Her daily routine became a grim ritual of unheeded warnings. She would position herself at strategic locations throughout the city, the main gates, the palace courtyard, the temple precincts, wherever she might encounter the military commanders and political leaders whose decisions would determine Troy's fate. Her prophecies during this period achieved a precision that should have established her credibility beyond question. Yet Apollo's curse ensured that each accurate prediction only reinforced the perception that she suffered from an elaborate form of madness that occasionally produced coincidental accuracies. The siege's progression validated Cassandra's warnings with devastating regularity. When she predicted that the Greeks would attempt to breach the eastern wall, using a massive siege engine constructed from ships' timbers, her description of the device was dismissed as impossible fantasy. 3 weeks later, the Trojans watched in horror as exactly such a machine rumbled across the plain, its bronze-reinforced ramhead shaped like a boar's snout, its wooden framework protected by layers of wet ox hides that deflected the burning arrows launched from the city's battlements. Her interactions with other prophetic figures during the war revealed the cruel isolation that Apollo's curse had created around her. Helenus, her twin brother, continued to serve as Troy's primary oracle, his visions welcomed and acted upon by the military leadership, despite their frequent similarity to Cassandra's dismissed warnings. The painful dynamic between the siblings intensified as the siege progressed, with Helenus finding himself unable to support or validate his sister's prophecies, even when they perfectly matched his own divine insights. During one particularly devastating exchange in the palace's private chambers, Helenus described a vision he had received about Greek reinforcements approaching from Thessaly, their ships carrying fresh warriors and siege equipment that would arrive within 10 days. Cassandra immediately confirmed that she'd witnessed the same fleet in her own prophetic sight, providing additional details about the specific commanders leading the expedition and the particular types of weapons they carried. Yet, when Helenus reported his vision to the War Council, he found himself unable to mention his sister's corroborating testimony, the curse operating so effectively that even he could not overcome its supernatural compulsion to dismiss her words. The presence of other seers and diviners from throughout the ancient world added another layer of complexity to Cassandra's wartime experiences. Both sides in the conflict consulted numerous prophetic figures, from the famous Calchas who served the Greek forces to various Anatolian shamans who offered their services to Troy's defenders. These individuals possessed genuine prophetic abilities of varying degrees, yet none approached the comprehensive accuracy that characterized Cassandra's Apollo-enhanced visions. The tragic irony of her situation became even more apparent when she observed how these lesser seers were treated with respect and attention while her superior insights were consistently ignored. Calchas himself represented everything that Cassandra might have been without Apollo's curse. The Greek seer's interpretations of omens and divine signs guided crucial strategic decisions throughout the siege, his words carrying the authority that came from proven accuracy and institutional support. When Calchas declared that the gods favoured a particular military strategy, Greek commanders implemented his recommendations without question. When he warned of divine displeasure over specific actions, the army modified its behaviour accordingly. His prophecies functioned as they were intended to, bridging the gap between divine will and human action in ways that Cassandra's superior visions could never achieve. The contrast became particularly painful during the plague that struck the Greek camp in the war's second year. Cassandra's prophetic abilities had revealed the supernatural cause of the disease: Apollo's anger over Agamemnon's treatment of crises, the priest whose daughter had been taken as a prize of war. Her vision showed exactly how the plague would spread through the Greek forces, which units would be affected first, and what actions would be necessary to appease the gods' wrath. Yet when she attempted to share this information with Trojan leaders, hoping they might use it to negotiate an advantageous peace, her words were dismissed as wishful thinking designed to encourage false hope. Meanwhile, Calchas received similar divine revelation about the plague's cause and successfully convinced Agamemnon to return Chryseis to her father, ending the supernatural affliction that had decimated the Greek army. The Greek seer's intervention prevented thousands of deaths and restored his army's fighting capacity, demonstrating the practical power that prophetic insight could wield when accompanied by credibility. Cassandra watched these events unfold with the bitter knowledge that her superior understanding of the situation had been rendered useless by Apollo's curse. Her attempts to influence the war's course through indirect means proved equally futile, though they revealed her growing sophistication in understanding the limitations imposed by her supernatural punishment. Recognizing that direct warnings would be dismissed regardless of their accuracy, Cassandra began attempting to manipulate events through careful suggestions and strategic omissions. She would position herself where key decisions were being made, hoping that her presence might somehow influence the outcome, even if her words carried no weight. During the debate over whether to accept Hector's challenge for single combat with the Greek champion, Cassandra tried to guide the discussion by asking seemingly innocent questions about the tactical implications of such an encounter. Her queries were designed to highlight the risks involved and encourage more cautious consideration of the proposal. Yet even these subtle interventions failed to achieve their intended effect, as the curse seemed to extend beyond her explicit prophecies to encompass any attempt to influence decisions based on her supernatural knowledge. The wooden horse incident represented the culmination of Cassandra's wartime frustrations, as she witnessed Troy's leaders making the exact fatal decision that her visions had revealed years earlier. When the massive construction appeared outside the city gates, abandoned by a Greek army that had apparently sailed away in defeat, Cassandra's reaction was immediate and desperate. She threw herself before the assembled war council, describing in precise detail the warriors hidden within the horse's hollow belly, the signal fires that would summon the returning fleet, and the systematic destruction that would follow once the device was brought within Troy's walls. Her warnings about the horse achieved a level of specificity that should have been impossible without genuine prophetic insight. She described the exact number of warriors concealed inside, 39 elite soldiers led by Odysseus himself. She identified the specific weapons they carried, from the short swords optimized for close-quarters combat to the signal torches that would alert their comrades waiting beyond the horizon. She even revealed the names of individual warriors and their assigned targets within the city, information that no spy or scout could have obtained through conventional means. The debate that followed Cassandra's warnings revealed how completely Apollo's curse had isolated her from meaningful participation in Troy's decision-making process. Military commanders who had witnessed her prophetic accuracy throughout the siege found themselves unable to take her current warnings seriously, despite the detailed precision of her descriptions. Political advisors who respected her intelligence in other contexts dismissed her concerns about the horse as the product of war-induced paranoia. Even religious leaders, who should have been most sensitive to divine revelation, interpreted her desperate pleas as evidence of spiritual instability rather than prophetic insight. The curse's operation during this crucial moment demonstrated its most insidious aspect, the way it corrupted not just belief in Cassandra's words, but also the logical processes that might have led to independent verification of her claims. When she suggested that the horse be examined for hidden compartments, or that scouts be sent to verify whether the Greek fleet had actually departed, these reasonable precautions were dismissed as unnecessary complications. The supernatural compulsion to disbelieve her extended to encompass any actions that might validate her warnings, ensuring that her prophecies would remain forever unconfirmed until after their tragic fulfillment. Laocoon, the priest who would later be killed by serpents for attempting to warn against the horse, initially seemed to offer hope that someone might support Cassandra's position through independent reasoning. His famous declaration that Greeks bearing gifts should be distrusted aligned perfectly with her prophetic warnings, suggesting that divine intervention might provide alternative means of preventing Troy's destruction. Yet, even Laocoon's dramatic death, devoured by sea serpents in full view of the assembled Trojans, was interpreted as divine punishment for opposing the god's will rather than confirmation of the horse's dangerous nature. The psychological toll of watching these events unfold according to her visions, while being powerless to prevent them, pushed Cassandra toward the edge of genuine madness. The distinction between prophetic insight and mental instability became increasingly blurred as the stress of her impossible situation manifested in behaviors that reinforced public perception of her condition. She began speaking to invisible presences, addressing the spirits of future victims whose deaths she had witnessed in her visions. Her sleep became fitful and interrupted by nightmares that were actually prophetic dreams, causing her to cry out warnings during the night that disturbed other palace residents. The growing attribution of madness to Cassandra reflected both the genuine psychological strain of her situation and the social need to explain her increasingly erratic behaviour. Palace physicians, trained in the medical theories inherited from Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions, diagnosed her condition as a form of divine possession that had become corrupted by excessive exposure to supernatural forces. They prescribed treatments involving special diets, herbal remedies, and ritual purifications designed to restore the proper balance between her mortal nature and her prophetic gifts. These medical interventions proved ineffective because they addressed symptoms rather than the supernatural cause of her condition. The curse that bound her prophetic abilities could not be countered through conventional healing methods, as it operated on a divine level that transcended normal understanding of mental and spiritual health. The physician's failure to improve her condition only reinforced the perception that she suffered from an incurable form of madness, further undermining any remaining credibility her words might have possessed. The question of whether Cassandra's apparent madness represented genuine divine affliction, or the natural result of her impossible burden, became a subject of debate among Troy's intellectual elite. Philosophers trained in the rational traditions developed in Ionian cities argued that her condition resulted from the psychological stress of possessing knowledge that could not be effectively communicated. They suggested that the isolation created by universal disbelief had gradually eroded her mental stability, creating behaviours that appeared supernatural but actually reflected understandable human responses to an intolerable situation. Religious thinkers, by contrast, interpreted her condition as evidence of ongoing divine intervention in her life. They argued that Apollo's continued influence over her prophetic abilities had created a form of possession that existed in tension with her mortal nature, resulting in the erratic behaviours that characterized her daily existence. This theological explanation suggested that her madness was not a symptom of mental illness, but rather a manifestation of the supernatural forces that controlled her destiny. The truth encompassed elements of both interpretations, as Cassandra's condition reflected the interaction between divine curse and human psychology in ways that neither purely rational nor purely religious explanations could fully address. Apollo's supernatural punishment had created an impossible situation that would have challenged any mortal's sanity, while the specific nature of the curse ensured that her responses to this situation would be interpreted as evidence of madness rather than reasonable reactions to supernatural torment. The wooden horse stood silhouetted against the dawn sky like a monument to deception, its painted surface gleaming with morning dew as Trojan citizens gathered around this supposed gift from their departed enemies. Cassandra's final desperate attempt to prevent the catastrophe began before the sun had fully risen, her bare feet carrying her across the cold stone courtyard toward the massive construction that dominated the space before Troy's main gates. Her white sleeping chiton whipped around her legs as she ran, her unbound hair streaming behind her like a dark banner of warning that no one would heed. She carried a burning torch in one hand and a bronze-headed axe in the other, weapons seized from the palace armory in her frantic determination to destroy the instrument of Troy's doom. The torch cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the wild desperation in her eyes as she approached the towering wooden structure. Her prophetic visions had shown her exactly where the hidden warriors lay, concealed within the horse's belly, and she knew that fire applied to the right sections of the oak planking would force them to reveal themselves or perish in the flames. The guards stationed around the horse moved to intercept her before she could reach the wooden walls, their bronze-tipped spears lowering to block her path. These were veteran soldiers who had served throughout the siege, men who had witnessed Cassandra's prophetic accuracy on countless occasions, yet Apollo's curse rendered them incapable of recognizing the validity of her current actions. They saw only a disturbed princess attempting to destroy what appeared to be a magnificent trophy of Trojan victory, her behavior confirming the widespread belief that the strain of war had finally broken her already fragile mind. Cassandra's voice rose above the morning sounds of the awakening city as she screamed warnings about the armed men hidden within the horse's hollow interior. She described their exact positions, naming Odysseus as their leader and identifying specific warriors by their distinctive armor and weapons. Her words carried the ring of absolute truth, delivered with the passionate intensity of someone who had witnessed these facts through divine revelation. Yet the supernatural compulsion created by Apollo's curse transformed her accurate prophecies into the ravings of a madwoman in the ears of all who heard them. The princess fought against the restraining hands with surprising strength, her desperation lending power to muscles that had never been trained for combat. She managed to break free momentarily, lunging toward the horse with her torch extended, the flames licking hungrily at the painted wood as she pressed the burning brand against the construction's flank. The acrid smell of scorching paint and heated wood filled the air, and for a brief moment it seemed possible that her desperate gambit might succeed in forcing the hidden Greeks to reveal themselves. The soldiers overpowered her before the fire could take hold, wresting the torch from her grasp and pinning her arms behind her back with practiced efficiency. The axe clattered across the stone paving as she was dragged away from the horse, her struggles growing more frantic as she watched the small scorch mark she'd created being extinguished with water from the nearby fountain. Her screams echoed off the surrounding buildings as she was carried back toward the palace, her voice hoarse from shouting warnings that would save no one because no one possessed the supernatural ability to believe them. King Priam emerged from the palace as his daughter was being restrained, his aged face creased with concern and embarrassment as he witnessed her public breakdown. The king's white beard was perfectly groomed despite the early hour, his purple-bordered chiton indicating that he'd been awakened by the commotion and had dressed hastily to investigate. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he approached Cassandra, the weight of his 70 years evident in his careful steps across the uneven courtyard stones. The curse's operation was particularly evident in Priam's reaction to his daughter's condition. Despite decades of witnessing her prophetic accuracy, despite knowing intimately the supernatural gifts that marked her as divinely chosen, the king found himself unable to consider the possibility that her current warnings might be genuine. Instead, he saw only a beloved child whose mind had been shattered by the prolonged stress of siege warfare, her condition requiring compassionate care rather than serious attention to her prophetic pronouncements. Palace physicians were summoned to administer calming draughts prepared from poppy extract and other medicinal herbs, their treatments designed to sedate rather than cure what they perceived as an episode of divine madness. Cassandra was carried to her chambers in the palace's eastern wing, her struggles growing weaker as the opiates took effect, her voice fading to whispered pleas that went unheard even by the servants who tended to her needs. The bronze-fitted doors of her room were barred from the outside, ostensibly for her own protection, but effectively ensuring that she could not interfere with the celebration that was already beginning throughout the city. The Trojan decision to bring the wooden horse within their walls proceeded exactly as Cassandra's visions had foretold. The massive construction requiring the combined efforts of hundreds of citizens working with ropes and wooden rollers to transport it through the gates. The eastern gate had to be partially dismantled to accommodate the horse's height, its stone lintel removed and carefully set aside to be replaced once the trophy had been installed in the central plaza. The irony was lost on the celebrating Trojans that they were literally breaking down their own defences to admit the instrument of their destruction. As darkness fell across the city, Cassandra lay in her chamber feeling the approach of Troy's final night with the clarity that only her cursed prophetic abilities could provide. The sedatives had dulled her physical responses without diminishing her supernatural sight, creating a nightmarish state where she could perceive every detail of the approaching catastrophe while being unable to move or speak effectively. Her enhanced visions showed her the hidden warriors stirring within the horse's belly as they prepared for their deadly mission, their bronze armour carefully wrapped to prevent any metallic sounds that might alert the guards. The princess witnessed Odysseus distributing final instructions to his men, his scarred face illuminated by the dim light of a shuttered lantern, as he reviewed the signal arrangements that would coordinate their attack with the returning Greek fleet. She saw the specific rope ladder that would be lowered from the horse's concealed opening, its hemp strands tested for strength and silence before being coiled for deployment. Her prophetic sight revealed the exact moment when the first warrior would emerge, his sandaled feet touching Trojan stone as he began the systematic destruction of everything she held dear. The celebration throughout Troy reached its peak during the evening hours, with citizens gathering in the streets to drink wine and sing songs of victory. The wooden horse dominated the central plaza like a massive altar to triumph, its painted surface reflecting the light of hundreds of torches and oil lamps that illuminated the festivities. Children ran between the legs of the construction, their laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings, while their parents toasted the end of 10 years of siege warfare. Cassandra's visions revealed the cruel irony of these celebrations, showing her how the very citizens who danced around the horse would become its victims within hours. She saw specific families whose joy would turn to terror, individual faces that would soon be contorted with fear and pain as Greek swords found their marks. The enhanced clarity of her prophetic abilities meant that she experienced these future deaths with the same emotional intensity as if they were occurring in the present moment, her sedated body racked with silent sobs for losses that had not yet occurred but were now inevitable. The first Greek warriors began emerging from the horse during the darkest hour before dawn, when the celebration had finally ended and most Trojans had retired to their homes. Odysseus descended first, his movements careful and controlled as he tested each rung of the rope ladder before committing his full weight to it. His bronze-soled sandals made barely audible scraping sounds against the wooden planks, each footstep calculated to minimize noise that might alert any remaining guards or late-night wanderers. The 38 warriors who followed their commander moved with the disciplined precision of elite soldiers executing a long-rehearsed plan. Each man carried weapons optimized for urban combat, short swords that could be wielded effectively in narrow alleyways, daggers for silent killing, and small shields that would not encumber movement through doorways and corridors. Their faces were blackened with soot and olive oil to prevent reflective glints from betraying their positions, while their bronze armour had been dulled with lampblack for the same purpose. Cassandra watched through her prophetic sight as these infiltrators spread throughout the city according to predetermined assignments, their routes carefully planned to seize control of strategic locations before the main assault began. Some moved toward the gates to secure them for the approaching Greek army, while others headed for the palace complex to eliminate key defenders and capture members of the royal family. The coordination of their movements demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence gathering that had preceded this operation, with each warrior knowing exactly where to find his assigned objectives. The signal fires that would summon the waiting Greek fleet blazed from Troy's highest towers as the infiltrators completed their initial objectives, the flames visible to ships that had been lurking beyond the horizon throughout the night. Cassandra's enhanced visions revealed the massive scale of the deception, showing her hundreds of vessels that had never actually departed, but had remained hidden behind the islands of Tenedos and Imbros. The black-hulled warships emerged from concealment like hunting wolves, their bronze rams cutting through the dark water as they raced toward Troy's undefended harbour. The systematic slaughter that followed unfolded with the methodical efficiency of a military operation executed by professional soldiers against unprepared civilians. The first Trojan casualties were the gate guards, killed in their sleep by infiltrators who had approached their posts with the silent skill of trained assassins. These men died without raising any alarm, their bronze-tipped spears never leaving their scabbards as Greek daggers found the gaps in their leather armour. Palace defenders who might have organised effective resistance were eliminated in coordinated attacks that prevented any unified response to the invasion. Cassandra witnessed the death of her brother Deiphobus, who had married Helen after Paris's death earlier in the war, his throat cut by Greek warriors who had infiltrated the royal quarters while he slept. The princess saw her sister-in-law Helen herself opening doors and providing information to the attackers, her betrayal of Troy's defences completing the web of deception that had begun with the wooden horse. The main Greek army poured through Troy's opened gates like a flood of bronze and iron, their war cries echoing through streets that had known only peace for the past 10 years. These were hardened veterans of the long siege, men whose patience had been tested by years of frustrated assault against Troy's impregnable walls. Their pent-up fury at being denied victory for so long now found release in systematic destruction that spared neither combatant nor civilian, sacred space nor private dwelling. Cassandra's prophetic abilities revealed not only the immediate carnage, but also the specific fates that awaited the Greek victors themselves, her enhanced sight extending beyond Troy's destruction to encompass the divine vengeance that would follow their triumph. She witnessed Agamemnon's death at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra, the bronze blade entering his back as he bathed in his palace at Mycenae. Her visions showed Odysseus wandering the Mediterranean for 10 years, his ships destroyed and his men devoured by monsters as punishment for his role in Troy's destruction. The violation of sacred spaces throughout the city brought down divine wrath that would pursue the Greek victors for years to come. Cassandra watched as soldiers desecrated temples, stealing golden vessels and bronze statues while showing no respect for the sanctity of spaces dedicated to the gods. The most serious sacrilege occurred at Athena's temple, where Ajax the Lesser would soon drag Cassandra herself from the altar where she'd sought sanctuary, his violation of divine law ensuring his own death in the shipwreck that would claim him during the voyage home. The palace complex became the scene of the war's most personal tragedies, as Greek warriors systematically hunted down members of Troy's royal family. Cassandra witnessed her father Priam's final moments as he was struck down at the altar of Zeus Herkios, the sacred hearth that should have protected him from violence. Neoptolemus, Achilles' young son, showed no respect for the elderly king's age or the sanctuary he had claimed, his sword piercing Priam's chest as the old man clutched the altar's marble base. The specific details of Troy's destruction played out before Cassandra's prophetic sight with agonizing precision, each building's collapse and each citizen's death occurring exactly as her visions had foretold. The great marketplace where merchants had gathered for centuries was consumed by flames that melted bronze statues into shapeless lumps, while the residential districts became hunting grounds where Greek soldiers pursued fleeing families through narrow alleyways. The systematic nature of the destruction revealed itself as more than mere military conquest. This was the complete erasure of a civilization that had dominated the Eastern Mediterranean for generations. As dawn approached and Troy's destruction neared completion, Cassandra found herself being dragged from her chamber by Greek soldiers who had been assigned to secure valuable prisoners. Her prophetic abilities showed her the identity of her captor before he appeared, Agamemnon himself, the Greek commander whose scarred hands would soon claim ownership of Apollo's former favourite. The irony of her fate was not lost on her cursed consciousness, as she understood that her prophetic gifts would continue to torment her, even in slavery, showing her the approaching deaths of those who had destroyed her city, while remaining powerless to prevent any aspect of their predetermined doom. The flames consuming Troy cast dancing shadows across the marble columns of Athena's temple as Cassandra pressed herself against the cold stone of the altar, her torn chiton barely covering her trembling form. The sacred precinct had become her final refuge as Greek warriors swept through the burning city, their bronze weapons gleaming in the firelight as they hunted down the surviving members of Troy's royal family. The ancient sanctuary laws that protected suppliants who sought divine protection at sacred altars represented her last hope for survival, though her prophetic abilities had already revealed the horrific violation that awaited her in this most holy place. Ajax the Lesser, son of Oileus and ruler of the Locrian contingent, approached the temple with the swagger of a victorious warrior drunk on conquest and wine. His bronze corselet bore the dents and scratches of 10 years of siege warfare, while his leather-wrapped spear shaft showed the wear of countless battles fought beneath Troy's walls. The Locrian prince stood shorter than most of the other Greek commanders, his stocky frame compensating for lack of height with impressive muscular development that spoke of years spent training with sword and spear. His dark beard was streaked with grey despite his relatively young age, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a professional soldier who had learned to view human life as just another commodity to be claimed in war. The motivations driving Ajax toward his act of supreme sacrilege were complex, rooted in a combination of personal frustration, divine madness, and the intoxicating effects of Troy's destruction. Throughout the long siege, he had been overshadowed by more famous warriors, his namesake Ajax the Great, Achilles, Diomedes, and others whose exploits earned them glory while his own contributions went largely unrecognized. The Locrian contingent he commanded was small compared to the forces brought by Agamemnon or Menelaus, limiting his opportunities to distinguish himself in major battles or claim significant portions of Troy's wealth. His frustration had been compounded by the distribution of spoils following Troy's fall, as the most valuable prizes, golden vessels from the temples, bronze weapons from the armories, and the most beautiful captives from the royal household, had been claimed by commanders whose political influence exceeded his own. Agamemnon had already marked Cassandra as his personal prize, while other Greek leaders had secured the choicest selections from Troy's treasures. Ajax found himself relegated to claiming whatever remained after his betters had taken their shares, a humiliating position for a prince who had contributed blood and treasure to the Greek cause for a full decade. The wine flowing freely throughout the Greek camp as soldiers celebrated their victory had loosened whatever restraints might have normally governed Ajax's behaviour. The Locrian prince had consumed substantial quantities of the potent vintage stored in Troy's royal cellars, the alcohol combining with his existing resentments to create a dangerous state of disinhibition. The intoxicating effects were enhanced by the general atmosphere of license that accompanied the sack of a conquered city, where normal moral and legal constraints were suspended in favour of the victor's absolute authority over their defeated enemies. More significantly, Ajax had fallen under the influence of what the Greeks termed ate, a form of divine madness that clouded judgment and drove mortals toward acts of extreme folly. This supernatural affliction was often sent by the gods to punish mortals who had offended them, or to ensure that predetermined fates were fulfilled regardless of human intentions. In Ajax's case, the madness served to guarantee that he would commit the act of sacrilege necessary to bring down divine vengeance upon the Greek victors, his violation of Athena's temple ensuring that the goddess would punish the entire Greek fleet during their homeward voyage. The religious and cultural significance of what Ajax contemplated made his intended actions particularly heinous, according to ancient Greek moral standards. Sanctuary laws represented one of the most fundamental aspects of religious practice throughout the Mediterranean world, establishing sacred spaces where even the most desperate criminals could claim divine protection. These laws were considered so inviolable that violating them brought automatic pollution upon both the perpetrator and his entire community, requiring extensive purification rituals to restore proper relationships with the gods. Athena's temple in Troy held special significance as one of the most ancient and revered sanctuaries in the eastern Mediterranean. The goddess had been worshipped on this site since the earliest days of the city's founding, her protection symbolized by the Palladium, the sacred wooden image that had fallen from heaven during the reign of Elus. The temple's marble columns, each carved from single blocks of Proconnesian stone and standing 40 feet in height, supported a roof decorated with bronze reliefs depicting Athena's victories over the giants and her role in establishing justice among mortals. The altar where Cassandra sought sanctuary was particularly sacred, having been consecrated with the blood of thousands of sacrificial animals over the course of centuries. Its marble surface was stained dark with the accumulated offerings of generations of worshippers, while golden vessels used in ritual ceremonies gleamed in niches carved into the surrounding walls. The space was suffused with the lingering fragrance of frankincense and myrrh, sacred incenses that had been burned daily to honour the goddess and maintain the spiritual purity necessary for divine communication. Ajax's approach to the temple was witnessed by several other Greek warriors, though none made any attempt to restrain him or warn him of the consequences of violating sacred space. The general atmosphere of lawlessness that accompanied Troy's sack had suspended normal moral constraints, while the intoxicating effects of victory and wine had clouded the judgment of men who might otherwise have recognized the folly of offending Athena in her own sanctuary. Some of the observers were themselves drunk on captured wine, while others were distracted by their own pursuit of plunder and captives throughout the burning city. The physical violation of Cassandra began the moment Ajax crossed the temple threshold, his bronze-soled sandals echoing against the marble floor as he strode toward the altar where she cowered. The princess's prophetic abilities had shown her exactly what would occur, but the knowledge provided no protection against the brutal reality of the assault. Ajax's hands, still stained with the blood of Trojan defenders he'd killed during the night's fighting, tore at her white chiton as she pressed herself against the altar's marble base. Cassandra's desperate pleas for divine protection went unheeded as Ajax dragged her from the altar, her bare feet sliding across the polished marble as she struggled against his superior strength. The sacred vessels arranged around the altar's perimeter crashed to the floor as her flailing limbs knocked them from their positions, the golden libation bowls and silver incense burners clattering across the stone with sounds that seemed to echo with supernatural resonance. The noise of her resistance mixed with Ajax's harsh breathing and muttered curses as he overcame her attempts to maintain her grip on the altar's carved decorations. The actual assault took place on the temple floor directly before Athena's Chryselephantine statue, the goddess's ivory face seeming to watch with golden eyes as her sacred space was defiled. Ajax's violation of Cassandra was both a physical assault and a spiritual desecration, his actions polluting the holy ground that had been consecrated to divine service for centuries. The bronze fittings of his armour scraped against the marble floor as he pinned his victim beneath him, the metallic sounds creating a harsh counterpoint to Cassandra's muffled cries. Athena's response to the violation of her sanctuary was immediate and unmistakable, manifesting through supernatural phenomena that should have warned Ajax of the divine displeasure his actions had provoked. The golden eyes of the goddess's statue began to glow with their own inner light, casting eerie shadows that danced independently of the flames visible through the temple's windows. The marble columns started to vibrate with a low harmonic resonance that made the bronze decoration sing with otherworldly tones, while the temperature within the sanctuary dropped noticeably despite the fires raging throughout the city outside. The most dramatic sign of divine anger came in the form of the Palladium itself, the ancient wooden image that guaranteed Troy's protection beginning to weep tears of blood that stained its carved features. This manifestation of supernatural displeasure was so obvious that even Ajax, in his wine-clouded and divinely maddened state, could not fail to recognize it as evidence of Athena's wrath. Yet the ache that possessed him prevented rational response to these warnings, driving him to complete his act of sacrilege, despite the clear signs that he was bringing divine vengeance upon himself and his compatriots. The earth itself seemed to respond to the violation occurring within the sacred space, with tremors that made the massive stone blocks of the temple's foundation shift slightly in their mortar beds. Dust fell from the ceiling as the building's structure groaned under stresses that had no natural explanation, while the carefully fitted marble floor tiles cracked in patterns that radiated outward from the altar where the assault was taking place. These seismic disturbances were felt throughout the burning city, adding to the general chaos as buildings already weakened by fire began to collapse under the additional strain. The supernatural phenomena accompanying Ajax's crime were witnessed by several Greek soldiers who had followed him to the temple, their accounts later providing detailed testimony about the divine signs that mark this moment as a turning point in the gods' relationship with the victorious Greek forces. These men described how the flames of the oil lamps burning throughout the sanctuary suddenly flared higher, casting shadows that moved against the natural direction of the light sources. They reported hearing voices speaking in unknown languages, as if the spirits of ancient priestesses were calling down curses upon the violator of their sacred space. The immediate aftermath of the assault saw Ajax staggering from the temple, his bronze armour clattering as he attempted to flee the scene of his crime. The divine madness that had driven him to commit the sacrilege began to lift as he crossed the threshold back into the secular space of the city streets, leaving him with growing awareness of the magnitude of his offence. The wine that had clouded his judgment was metabolizing rapidly under the influence of supernatural forces, his intoxication replaced by a cold sobriety that made him acutely conscious of the divine signs he had ignored. Cassandra remained on the temple floor where Ajax had left her, her torn chiton barely covering her bruised form as she wept for the violation of both her person and the sacred space she had sought to protect her. Her prophetic abilities showed her the divine vengeance that would follow this act of sacrilege, revealing the specific punishments that would befall not only Ajax himself, but also the entire Greek fleet. She saw storms that would scatter the ships across the Mediterranean, shipwrecks that would claim hundreds of lives, and years of wandering that would prevent many Greek heroes from ever reaching their homes. The pollution created by Ajax's crime extended beyond the immediate participants to encompass all the Greek forces, as the violation of sanctuary laws brought collective guilt upon the entire army that had permitted such sacrilege to occur. This spiritual contamination would manifest in practical consequences during the Greeks' homeward voyage, as Athena's anger pursued them across the wine-dark sea with supernatural storms and divine interventions designed to punish their collective responsibility for the temple's desecration. The goddess's wrath focused particularly on the Locrian contingent that Ajax commanded, though her vengeance would ultimately extend to affect the entire Greek fleet. Athena's divine nature as both protector of cities and guardian of justice made Ajax's crime a personal affront that demanded immediate and comprehensive punishment. The violation of her sanctuary represented not merely an assault upon one of her worshippers, but a direct challenge to the divine authority that made sanctuary laws effective throughout the ancient world. The specific form of Athena's vengeance began to manifest even before the Greek fleet departed from Troy's smouldering harbour. Supernatural storms gathered on the horizon despite clear skies, their dark clouds rotating in patterns that defied natural meteorological phenomena. The winds that had favoured the Greeks throughout their siege suddenly shifted to blow from unfavourable quarters, making it difficult for their ships to maintain formation or follow their intended courses toward home. Ajax's own fate was sealed from the moment he violated Athena's sanctuary, though the goddess chose to delay his punishment until the homeward voyage was well underway. The divine justice that would claim him was designed to serve as both personal retribution for his crime and public demonstration of the consequences that followed from offending the gods. His death would occur in circumstances that made clear the supernatural nature of his punishment, ensuring that survivors would understand the connection between his sacrilege and his destruction. The Locrian prince's final voyage began inauspiciously, with his ships encountering contrary winds and rough seas from the moment they left Troy's harbour. His bronze-prowed vessels, which had carried him safely across the Aegean during the initial journey to Troy 10 years earlier, now seemed cursed with mechanical failures and navigational difficulties that prevented normal progress toward home. Oars snapped without apparent cause, while bronze fittings worked loose despite being properly maintained by experienced sailors. The supernatural nature of Ajax's approaching doom became apparent as his ship was separated from the rest of the Greek fleet by a storm of unprecedented violence. Waves higher than any natural phenomenon could generate battered his vessel, their crests topped with foam that glowed with phosphorescent light. The wind howled with voices that seemed to speak in human language, calling down curses upon the violator of sacred space as lightning struck repeatedly at his ship's bronze fittings. Ajax's death came as he attempted to swim to safety after his ship was wrecked on the Chirean rocks, jagged stones that rose from the sea near the island of Mykonos. The Locrian prince had always been a strong swimmer, his muscular frame well suited to fighting the waves that threatened to drag him down to the depths. For a time, it seemed that he might escape the divine vengeance pursuing him, his powerful strokes carrying him toward the rocky shore despite the supernatural forces arrayed against him. His fatal error came in the moment of apparent triumph, as he dragged himself onto the rocks and boasted that he had escaped the god's punishment through his own strength and skill. This act of hubris provided Athena with the justification she needed to complete her vengeance, as Ajax's boast constituted a direct challenge to divine authority that could not be permitted to stand. Poseidon, responding to Athena's request for assistance, struck the rocks with his trident, splitting them apart and sending Ajax tumbling into the churning waters below. The Locrian prince's body was never recovered, claimed by the depths as a sacrifice to appease the divine wrath his sacrilege had provoked. His death served as both personal punishment for violating Athena's sanctuary and warning to other mortals who might consider similar acts of impiety. The supernatural circumstances surrounding his destruction made clear that the gods would not tolerate violations of sacred space, regardless of the military or political authority wielded by the perpetrators. The bronze-hulled ship that carried Cassandra away from the smoking ruins of Troy cut through the wine-dark waters of the Aegean with relentless efficiency, its 24 oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm as the crew rowed toward their distant homeland. Agamemnon's personal vessel bore the distinctive lion emblem of Mycenae painted on its black sail, the golden beast seeming to prowl across the fabric as sea winds filled the canvas. The ship's bronze ram, forged in the shape of a boar's head with ivory tusks, cleaved through the waves while leaving a wake of white foam that stretched back toward the diminishing coastline of Asia Minor. Cassandra huddled in the vessel's stern, her wrists bound with leather cords that had been soaked in seawater to prevent her from loosening them during the voyage. The rough woolen cloak that covered her torn chiton provided little protection against the salt spray that periodically drenched the ship's passengers, while iron shackles around her ankles ensured that she could not attempt to throw herself overboard in desperation. Her status aboard the ship was unmistakably that of valuable cargo rather than honoured guest, though Agamemnon's soldiers treated her with the careful respect due to property belonging to their commander. The Greek king himself stood near the ship's prow, his scarred hands gripping the bronze rail as he gazed ahead toward the horizon, where Mycenae lay hidden beyond the curve of the earth. Agamemnon's bronze corselet, dented from years of warfare beneath Troy's walls, caught the morning sunlight and reflected it in scattered patterns across the deck. His greying beard was carefully trimmed despite the rigours of the sea voyage, while his dark eyes held the calculating expression of a ruler who had learned to view everything in terms of political advantage and personal gain. The golden diadem that marked his royal status was secured with leather straps to prevent it from being lost to the waves, its polished surface bearing the intricate engravings that proclaimed his authority over the Mycenaean Confederation. The relationship between captor and captive during the voyage revealed the complex dynamics that governed the treatment of high-status prisoners in the ancient world. Cassandra represented far more than a simple war prize to Agamemnon, though her beauty and royal bloodline certainly enhanced her value as a trophy of victory. Her reputation as a prophetess, despite the universal disbelief that Apollo's curse created around her warnings, made her a potentially valuable asset for a king who understood the political importance of divine favour and supernatural guidance in maintaining royal authority. Agamemnon's interest in Cassandra's prophetic abilities reflected his sophisticated understanding of how religious legitimacy functioned in Bronze Age political systems. Kings throughout the Mediterranean world relied heavily on divine sanction to justify their rule, with successful prophecy serving as evidence of godly approval that could strengthen a monarch's position against internal rivals and external enemies. The capture of Troy's most famous prophetess, even one whose words carried no credibility, represented a symbolic victory that demonstrated the gods' transfer of favour from the defeated Trojans to their Greek conquerors. The practical arrangements for Cassandra's confinement aboard the ship revealed Agamemnon's intention to preserve her value while ensuring her security during the voyage. She was provided with adequate food and water, though her meals consisted of simple fare appropriate for a captive rather than the delicacies that had graced royal tables in Troy. Her sleeping area was located in the ship's most secure section, surrounded by loyal soldiers who had been specifically instructed to prevent any escape attempts while protecting her from abuse by common sailors who might not understand her importance to their king's plans. The prophetic visions that tormented Cassandra during the sea voyage provided her with comprehensive knowledge of the fate awaiting her in Mycenae, though Apollo's curse ensured that she would be unable to communicate these insights effectively to anyone who might act upon them. Her enhanced supernatural sight revealed the specific circumstances that would lead to Agamemnon's death, showing her the bronze blade that Clytemnestra would drive into his back as he bathed in the royal palace. The vision included precise details about the queen's motivation for murder, her decade-long resentment over Agamemnon's sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, to secure favourable winds for the voyage to Troy. These prophetic images extended beyond Agamemnon's immediate fate to encompass the broader pattern of vengeance that would consume the house of Atreus for generations to come. Cassandra witnessed Orestes, Agamemnon's son, returning from exile to avenge his father's murder by killing both Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. Her visions showed the young prince's internal struggle between filial duty and matricidal horror, his decision ultimately driven by divine commands that made revenge both necessary and spiritually devastating. The curse that had originated with Atreus, Agamemnon's father, revealed itself through Cassandra's prophetic sight as a supernatural affliction that would continue claiming victims until divine justice was finally satisfied. She saw how Atreus had murdered the children of his brother Thyestes and served them to their father at a feast, the horrific crime creating a pollution that demanded blood vengeance across multiple generations. The curse manifested through a pattern of betrayal and murder that turned family members against each other, ensuring that each act of revenge only created new obligations for future retribution. The supernatural nature of this familial curse fascinated Cassandra's prophetic consciousness, revealing how divine justice operated across extended time periods to ensure that moral debts were eventually paid regardless of human attempts to escape consequences. Her vision showed how the gods used human emotions and desires as instruments of fate, manipulating love, hatred, and ambition to ensure that predetermined outcomes occurred exactly as divine will required. The curse represented a perfect example of how supernatural forces could work through apparently natural human motivations to achieve results that transcended individual agency. During the voyage, Cassandra's attempts to warn Agamemnon about his approaching doom followed the familiar pattern established by Apollo's curse, with her accurate prophecies being dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized captive whose mind had been shattered by Troy's destruction. When she described the bronze blade that would kill him, specifying its length and the particular angle at which it would enter his body, Agamemnon interpreted her words as threats rather than warnings. Her detailed knowledge of Clytemnestra's plans was attributed to feminine intuition about marital discord rather than genuine prophetic insight. The king's dismissal of Cassandra's warnings reflected both the supernatural compulsion created by Apollo's curse and his own psychological need to believe that his triumph over Troy had secured his position against all potential threats. Agamemnon had spent 10 years fighting beneath Troy's walls, enduring hardships and making sacrifices that he believed entitled him to enjoy the fruits of victory without concern for domestic complications. The possibility that his greatest triumph might lead directly to his destruction was too psychologically threatening to be seriously considered, making him particularly susceptible to the curse's influence. The ship's crew, composed of experienced sailors who had served Agamemnon throughout the Trojan campaign, provided an interesting study in how Apollo's curse affected different social classes and levels of education. The common seamen, who possessed little knowledge of prophetic traditions or supernatural phenomena, simply dismissed Cassandra's pronouncements as foreign babbling that held no relevance to their daily concerns. The ship's officers, who had greater familiarity with religious matters and divine communication, found themselves unable to take her warnings seriously despite recognizing the sophistication and internal consistency of her prophetic descriptions. The voyage itself proceeded through waters that held deep significance in Greek mythological and religious traditions, with the ship passing landmarks associated with the various divine interventions in mortal affairs. They sailed past the island of Lemnos, where Hephaestus had fallen when Zeus hurled him from Olympus, its volcanic peaks still smoking with the fires of the god's forge. The crew made appropriate offerings at shrines located on various islands, their rituals designed to secure divine favour for the remainder of their journey, while acknowledging the supernatural forces that controlled maritime travel. Cassandra's prophetic abilities revealed the specific divine influences that were shaping their voyage, showing her how Athena's continued anger over Ajax's sacrilege was creating subtle difficulties that would ultimately contribute to the disasters awaiting the Greek fleet. The goddess's wrath manifested through apparently natural phenomena, contrary winds that slowed their progress, equipment failures that seemed like normal wear, and navigational errors that appeared to result from human mistakes rather than supernatural intervention. The princess's enhanced supernatural sight also revealed the presence of other divine beings who were taking interest in their journey, including Poseidon, whose domain encompassed all maritime travel, and Hermes, whose role as messenger of the gods made him particularly concerned with the communication of prophetic warnings. These deities were engaged in complex negotiations regarding the fates of the various Greek heroes returning from Troy, their discussions determining which warriors would reach home safely and which would face divine punishment for their actions during the war. The approach to Mycenae's harbour marked a crucial transition in Cassandra's captivity, as her status shifted from war prize being transported to permanent addition to Agamemnon's household. The sight of the familiar Greek coastline, with its rocky headlands and olive-covered hills, represented the final severing of her connection to the Trojan world that had shaped her identity for the first 20 years of her life. The bronze-fitted towers of Mycenae's citadel were visible from several miles at sea, their massive stones fitted together with such precision that they seemed to have been placed by giants rather than human builders. The harbour itself bustled with activity as ships from the returning Greek fleet arrived in scattered groups, their crews eager to unload the spoils of war and reunite with families they had not seen for a decade. Bronze weapons gleamed in neat stacks on the stone quays, while wooden chests containing golden vessels and precious textiles were carefully inventoried by royal scribes who recorded each item for tax purposes. The human captives represented a particularly valuable category of plunder, with skilled craftsmen, beautiful women, and individuals of noble birth commanding premium prices in the slave markets that had developed to handle the influx of Trojan prisoners. Clytemnestra's presence at the harbour to welcome her husband's return provided Cassandra with her first direct encounter with the woman whose actions would soon fulfill the prophetic visions that had tormented her throughout the voyage. The Queen of Mycenae stood on the main pier surrounded by a retinue of court officials and palace guards, her purple-bordered curtain and golden jewellery proclaiming her royal status, while her carefully composed expression concealed the murderous intentions that Cassandra's supernatural sight revealed with perfect clarity. The Queen's physical appearance reflected both her royal breeding and the psychological strain of maintaining a facade of marital devotion while planning her husband's murder. Clytemnestra's dark hair was arranged in the elaborate style favoured by Mycenaean noblewomen, secured with golden pins decorated with images of lions and griffins. Her face bore the classical features prized throughout the Greek world: high cheekbones, straight nose, and large eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and calculation. Yet Cassandra's prophetic abilities revealed the hatred that burned beneath this carefully maintained exterior, showing her the specific moments when the Queen's composure would crack to reveal the fury that drove her towards matricidal revenge. The formal ceremonies accompanying Agamemnon's return followed protocols established by centuries of Mycenaean royal tradition, with religious observances designed to purify the returning warriors and thank the gods for their victory over Troy. Priests from various temples performed sacrificial rituals on the harbour's altars, their bronze knives cutting the throats of bulls and sheep, whose blood was offered to Zeus, Athena, and other deities who had supported the Greek cause. The smoke from these offerings rose in carefully interpreted patterns that the court augurs read for signs of divine approval or displeasure regarding the war's outcome. Cassandra's integration into Agamemnon's household began immediately upon their arrival at the palace complex, though her status remained ambiguous in ways that reflected the complex social dynamics surrounding high-ranking captives in Bronze Age society. She was neither slave nor free woman, neither family member nor complete outsider, but something uniquely her own, a royal prisoner whose prophetic gifts made her potentially valuable while her foreign origin and traumatic history made her inherently suspect. The physical arrangements for her confinement within the palace revealed Agamemnon's intention to maintain control over her, while exploiting whatever advantages her prophetic abilities might provide. She was assigned chambers in the palace's eastern wing, rooms that had previously housed visiting dignitaries and foreign ambassadors. The accommodations were comfortable by ancient standards, with bronze-fitted furniture, woolen tapestries depicting scenes of Mycenaean military victories, and windows that provided views of the surrounding countryside. Yet the bronze-reinforced doors could be barred from the outside, while guards stationed in the corridor ensured that she could not move freely throughout the palace complex. The Mycenaean court's reaction to Cassandra's presence revealed the complex attitudes that governed Greek responses to foreign prophetic figures. particularly those associated with defeated enemies. Some courtiers viewed her as a valuable addition to the royal household, recognizing that her reputation for prophetic accuracy, despite the universal disbelief that surrounded her current warnings, might provide useful insights for governmental decision-making. Others regarded her with suspicion, questioning whether a Trojan prophetess could be trusted to provide honest guidance to the Greek king who had destroyed her city. The religious establishment of Mycenae faced particular difficulties in determining how to integrate Cassandra into their existing prophetic traditions. The priests who served the various temples throughout the kingdom possessed their own methods for interpreting divine will, from examining the flight patterns of birds to analysing the entrails of sacrificial animals. Cassandra's direct reception of prophetic visions represented a different type of supernatural communication that challenged their established procedures while potentially offering access to divine knowledge that their traditional methods could not provide. The court's inability to believe Cassandra's warnings about Agamemnon's approaching death created a situation that perfectly exemplified the cruel irony of Apollo's curse. Her prophetic abilities provided her with detailed knowledge of events that would unfold within days or weeks, yet the supernatural compulsion that prevented others from accepting her words ensured that she remained powerless to influence the outcome she perceived. The curse operated so effectively that even direct statements about specific threats were interpreted as general expressions of hostility rather than genuine warnings about imminent danger. Cassandra's daily existence within the Mycenaean palace became a routine of frustrated prophecy and ignored warnings. Her supernatural gifts transformed into an instrument of perpetual torment that made every moment a reminder of her powerlessness. Her enhanced prophetic abilities continued to function at full strength, showing her not only the major events that would shape the kingdom's future, but also the minor details of daily life that would lead inexorably toward the predetermined catastrophes. She could see which servants would betray confidences, which merchants would cheat their customers, and which soldiers would desert their posts. Yet her warnings about these matters were dismissed with the same automatic disbelief that greeted her prophecies about royal assassination. The bronze-fitted doors of Cassandra's chambers in the Mycenaean palace swung open, with their familiar creak as the first grey light of dawn filtered through the narrow windows. She had not slept during the night, her prophetic consciousness consumed by the most vivid and comprehensive vision she had ever experienced. Images of death that would unfold within hours, revealing every detail of the murders that would claim both Agamemnon and herself before the sun reached its zenith. The enhanced clarity that Apollo's curse had granted her prophetic abilities now delivered its final, most devastating revelation. She could see her own approaching death with the same precise accuracy that had characterized all her previous visions. The specific circumstances of the coming murders played out before her supernatural sight like a theatrical performance whose every gesture and word had been predetermined by divine will. She witnessed Clytemnestra's preparations in the royal bath chamber, observing how the queen personally arranged the bronze vessels and linen towels that would serve as props in her elaborate deception. The murder weapon itself, a double-headed axe with a bronze blade honed to razor sharpness, lay concealed beneath folded cloth in a wooden chest beside the marble bathing pool. Cassandra's prophetic abilities revealed even the particular angle at which the blade would enter Agamemnon's back, penetrating between his ribs to pierce his heart with surgical precision. Her visions extended beyond the immediate violence to encompass the psychological dynamics that would drive Clytemnestra to commit matricide after a decade of carefully maintained deception. The queen's hatred for her husband had crystallized around the sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia, whose death at Aulis had secured favorable winds for the Greek fleet's voyage to Troy. Cassandra witnessed the specific moment when Agamemnon's blade had cut across the young girl's throat, her blood pooling on the altar, while priests interpreted the omens as signs of divine approval for the military expedition. This act of filicide had transformed Clytemnestra's love into an implacable desire for vengeance that no amount of military glory or captured treasure could satisfy. The role of Aegisthus in the planned murders revealed itself through Cassandra's enhanced prophetic sight as more than simple adultery or political opportunism. Agamemnon's cousin possessed his own hereditary reasons for seeking the king's death, his motivation rooted in the curse that had afflicted the house of Atreus since the previous generation. Cassandra observed how Aegisthus's father Thyestes had been tricked into consuming the flesh of his own children, served to him by Atreus in a feast that violated the most fundamental taboos governing human behaviour. This act of cannibalistic revenge had created a supernatural obligation for blood vengeance that would only be satisfied when Atreus's line paid an equivalent price for their ancestors' crimes. The prophetic images showed Cassandra exactly how the murders would unfold, beginning with Agamemnon's arrival at the palace after completing the ritual purifications required of returning warriors. The king would enter the bath chamber alone, dismissing his guards in accordance with Clytemnestra's suggestion that he needed privacy to cleanse himself of the pollution accumulated during 10 years of warfare. The warm water, scented with oils imported from Egypt and Cyprus, would relax his battle-hardened muscles while making him vulnerable to attack from someone he trusted completely. Clytemnestra's approach would be silent and swift, her bare feet making no sound against the marble floor as she lifted the concealed axe from its hiding place. The queen's physical strength, developed through years of managing the palace complex during her husband's absence, would prove adequate to deliver the fatal blow with sufficient force to penetrate bronze-reinforced leather and reach vital organs. Agamemnon's death would be nearly instantaneous, his warrior's reflexes useless against an attack that came from behind while he was relaxing in apparent safety. Cassandra's own death would follow immediately afterward, as Clytemnestra and Aegisthus eliminated the only witness whose prophetic abilities might reveal their guilt to investigators or divine authorities. The method chosen for her execution reflected both practical necessity and symbolic significance, as the conspirators planned to claim that she had died while attempting to defend her captor against unknown assassins. The bronze dagger that would end her life had been selected specifically for its Trojan origin, a weapon captured during the sack of her city that would support the fiction of foreign involvement in Agamemnon's murder. The location chosen for these murders held deep significance within the symbolic geography of the Mycenaean palace complex. The bath chamber where Agamemnon would die occupied the building's central courtyard, its marble walls decorated with frescoes depicting scenes of royal power and divine favour. The room's acoustics would ensure that the king's death cries echoed throughout the surrounding chambers, alerting the entire household to the violence while making it impossible to determine the exact source of the sounds. This confusion would provide crucial minutes for the conspirators to arrange the scene according to their predetermined narrative. Cassandra's prophetic visions revealed the specific details of how Clytemnestra and Aegisthus planned to justify their actions to the Mycenaean nobility and foreign allies who would demand explanations for their king's sudden death. They intended to claim that Trojan agents, possibly survivors who had infiltrated the returning Greek forces, had assassinated Agamemnon as revenge for their city's destruction. Cassandra's presence in the palace would support this narrative, as her death could be attributed to the same foreign conspiracy, while eliminating the only witness whose testimony might contradict their version of events. The broader political implications of Agamemnon's approaching murder extended throughout the Greek world, as his death would create a power vacuum that various ambitious nobles would attempt to fill. Cassandra's supernatural sight revealed the civil conflicts that would follow, showing her armies gathering in different regions as rival claimants pressed their cases for succession to the Mycenaean throne. The stability that Agamemnon's victory over Troy had seemed to guarantee would dissolve into chaos within months of his death, as the Greek confederation fractured along lines of personal loyalty and regional interest. Her prophetic abilities also showed her the divine responses that would follow the murders, revealing how the gods would interpret Clytemnestra's actions according to their own complex systems of justice and retribution. Zeus, as the supreme authority over mortal affairs, would permit the queen's revenge as legitimate punishment for Agamemnon's sacrifice of Iphigenia, recognizing that filicide demanded equivalent retribution regardless of the political or military circumstances that had motivated the original crime. Yet the manner of the murder, through deception and betrayal rather than open challenge, would create new obligations for vengeance that would eventually claim Clytemnestra herself. Apollo's role in the approaching events revealed itself through Cassandra's visions as a complex web of divine manipulation designed to ensure that his curse reached its intended conclusion. The god who had granted her prophetic abilities while ensuring that her warnings would never be believed, now prepared to reclaim his gifts through her death. Her murder serving as the final demonstration of how divine favour could be transformed into instruments of destruction. The irony was not lost on Cassandra's enhanced consciousness that Apollo's revenge would be completed by her inability to prevent her own death, despite possessing perfect knowledge of its approach. The morning of the murders began with Cassandra's final attempt to warn the palace inhabitants about the violence that would soon engulf them. She positioned herself in the main courtyard where servants, guards, and court officials would pass as they began their daily routines, her voice rising in desperate proclamations about the blood that would flow before sunset. Her warnings achieved a level of specificity that should have convinced even the most skeptical listeners, as she described not only who would die, but also the exact weapons that would kill them and the locations where their bodies would be discovered. The supernatural compulsion created by Apollo's curse operated with devastating efficiency during these final hours, transforming Cassandra's most accurate prophecies into evidence of complete mental breakdown. Palace guards who had witnessed her prophetic accuracy during previous months found themselves unable to take her current warnings seriously, interpreting her desperate pleas as the ravings of a traumatized captive whose mind had finally succumbed to the stress of imprisonment. Servants who had learned to respect her insights into daily palace affairs dismissed her predictions about royal murder as impossible fantasies that revealed the extent of her psychological deterioration. Her attempts to reach Agamemnon himself proved equally futile, as the king's triumphant mood following his victory over Troy made him particularly resistant to warnings about domestic threats. When Cassandra threw herself at his feet in the palace's great hall, describing the bronze axe that would split his skull and the marble floor that would be stained with his blood, Agamemnon interpreted her words as curses rather than prophecies. His response revealed both the supernatural influence of Apollo's curse and his own psychological need to believe that his military triumph had secured his position against all potential enemies. The king's dismissal of Cassandra's warnings was witnessed by numerous court officials and foreign dignitaries who had gathered to celebrate his return from Troy, their presence providing multiple witnesses to the prophetic accuracy that would only be recognized after the predicted events had occurred. These observers noted the specific details of her predictions, the time of day when the murders would occur, the identities of the perpetrators, and the methods they would employ, yet none possessed the supernatural ability to believe her words despite their obvious sincerity and internal consistency. Clytemnestra's reaction to Cassandra's public warnings provided the most chilling demonstration of how the curse protected the conspirators from exposure even when their victim possessed perfect knowledge of their plans. The Queen listened to detailed descriptions of her own actions with apparent concern and sympathy, expressing worry about the Trojan princess's mental state, while privately marvelling at how closely the ravings matched her actual intentions. The supernatural compulsion that prevented belief in Cassandra's prophecies extended to the conspirators themselves, allowing them to hear accurate descriptions of their plans without experiencing any fear of discovery or impulse to alter their predetermined course of action. The final hours before the murders unfolded exactly as Cassandra's visions had revealed, with each participant playing their assigned role in a drama whose outcome had been determined by forces beyond mortal control. Agamemnon completed the ritual purifications required of returning warriors, his bronze armour cleaned and polished before being stored in the palace armoury. The king's personal effects were arranged in his private chambers according to Clytemnestra's suggestions, their placement designed to support the narrative that would follow his death. The bath chamber itself was prepared with meticulous attention to detail, as Clytemnestra personally supervised the arrangement of vessels, towels and oils that would create the proper atmosphere for relaxation and vulnerability. The queen's servants, unaware of their mistress's true intentions, followed her instructions precisely while commenting on her thoughtful attention to her husband's comfort after his long absence. The murder weapon remained concealed in its predetermined location, its bronze blade reflecting the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the chamber's high windows. Cassandra's prophetic consciousness experienced these preparatory activities with the helpless clarity that had characterized all her supernatural visions, watching the stage being set for a tragedy she could perceive but not prevent. Her enhanced abilities showed her not only the immediate events that would unfold, but also the chain of consequences that would follow, revealing how these murders would initiate a cycle of vengeance that would consume multiple generations of the royal house. The curse of the house of Atreus would continue through Orestes' matricide and beyond, its supernatural influence ensuring that blood would continue to demand blood until divine justice was finally satisfied. The actual murders began as the sun reached its zenith, with Agamemnon entering the bath chamber alone while Cassandra was forcibly restrained in her quarters by guards who believed they were protecting her from her own prophetic hysteria. The king's death occurred with the swift brutality that her visions had revealed, Clytemnestra's axe splitting his skull before he could cry out for assistance. The bronze blade penetrated bone and brain with surgical precision, ending the life of Greece's greatest military commander in a moment of supreme vulnerability and betrayal. Cassandra's own death followed within minutes as Aegisthus entered her chambers with the bronze dagger that would end her tormented existence. Her prophetic abilities remained active until the final moment, showing her the specific angle at which the blade would enter her chest and the particular expression of grim satisfaction that would cross her killer's face as he completed his assigned task. The irony of her situation reached its ultimate expression in these final seconds, as she possessed perfect knowledge of her approaching death, while remaining powerless to prevent or escape it. The bronze dagger that ended Cassandra's life carried symbolic significance beyond its practical function as a murder weapon, representing the final severing of Troy's prophetic voice from the world of the living. Her death marked the completion of Apollo's revenge for her rejection of his advances, the curse that had transformed divine gift into unbearable burden finally achieving its intended conclusion. The god's punishment had operated with perfect efficiency, ensuring that his former favourite would experience the ultimate frustration of possessing absolute knowledge while being denied the credibility necessary to act upon it. The immediate aftermath of the murders saw Clytemnestra and Aegisthus implementing their predetermined plan to explain the deaths as the result of foreign conspiracy, their narrative supported by carefully arranged evidence, and the elimination of the only witness whose testimony might have contradicted their version of events. The palace guards who discovered the bodies found them positioned according to the conspirators' design, with Cassandra's corpse arranged to suggest that she had died defending her captor against unknown assassins. The broader implications of these deaths extended far beyond the immediate political consequences for Mycenae, as they represented the fulfillment of divine will operating through human agency to achieve predetermined outcomes. Apollo's curse had reached its intended conclusion through the actions of mortals who believed themselves to be pursuing personal vengeance, their choices manipulated by supernatural forces that ensured the completion of divine justice. Cassandra's death marks not only the end of her individual torment, but also the final demonstration of how the gods could transform their gifts into instruments of destruction when their will was defied. The prophetic voice that had warned of Troy's destruction, spoken truth that no one could believe, and witnessed the systematic fulfillment of divine will through human action, was finally silenced. Yet even in death, Cassandra's legacy would continue to influence events throughout the Greek world, as the accuracy of her final prophecies would eventually be recognized by those who survived to witness their fulfillment. Her warnings about the cycle of vengeance that would consume the house of Atreus would prove as accurate as all her previous predictions, though this vindication would come too late to save either herself or those whose deaths she had foreseen with such devastating clarity. The bronze dagger that ended Cassandra's life carried with it the final echo of Apollo's ancient curse, but her death marked not an ending but a transformation. In the immediate aftermath of the murders at Mycenae, as Clytemnestra and Aegisthus arranged their elaborate deception, the truth of Cassandra's final prophecies began its inexorable march toward vindication. The palace servants who had dismissed her warnings about Agamemnon's death as the ravings of a broken mind now found themselves confronting the precise fulfillment of every detail she had foretold. The bronze axe lay exactly where she had said it would be found, stained with the king's blood in patterns that matched her descriptions with uncanny accuracy. Within days of the murders, whispered conversations began circulating through the corridors of the Mycenaean palace, as servants and guards recalled the specificity of Cassandra's predictions. She had named not only the perpetrators and their methods, but had described the very hour when the violence would occur, the particular sounds that would echo through the marble halls, and even the arrangement of objects in the bath chamber where Agamemnon breathed his last. Those who had witnessed her desperate attempts to warn the king found themselves haunted by memories of her precise descriptions, their recollections creating an uncomfortable awareness that they had ignored genuine prophetic insight in favour of comfortable disbelief. The pattern established during Cassandra's lifetime continued after her death, as the supernatural accuracy of her prophecies became undeniable only in retrospect. Court officials who had attributed her warnings to feminine hysteria or foreign malice now recognized the divine nature of her insights, though this recognition came too late to benefit either the prophetess or those she had tried to save. The curse that had prevented belief in her living words did not extend to posthumous vindication, allowing observers to acknowledge the truth of her predictions once their fulfillment made denial impossible. The broader Greek world's recognition of Cassandra's prophetic accuracy developed gradually as news of Agamemnon's death spread throughout the Mediterranean. Kings and military commanders who had dismissed reports of her warnings during the Trojan War now found themselves reconsidering their earlier judgments as the precise fulfillment of her predictions became widely known. The fall of Troy had occurred exactly as she had foretold, down to the specific details of the wooden horse and the particular methods the Greeks had employed to breach the city's defences. Her warnings about individual fates during the siege had proven equally accurate, with heroes dying in precisely the circumstances she had described, despite universal disbelief in her prophetic abilities. The theological implications of Cassandra's vindication created profound discussions among the priesthoods throughout the Greek world, as religious authorities struggled to understand how divine truth could have been systematically rejected by mortals who should have recognized its supernatural origin. The priests of Apollo's temples found themselves particularly challenged by the paradox of their god's curse, which had transformed genuine prophecy into an instrument of torment while demonstrating the terrible power of divine will operating through human agency. Her story became a cautionary tale about the consequences of spurning divine favour, though it also raised disturbing questions about the nature of justice when punishment extended far beyond the original offence. The philosophical dimensions of Cassandra's legacy proved equally complex, as Greek thinkers attempted to understand the relationship between knowledge and power that her life had so dramatically illustrated. Her possession of perfect prophetic insight combined with complete inability to influence events based on that knowledge, created a paradox that challenged conventional understanding of how divine gifts were supposed to function in human society. The curse had revealed that truth without credibility was powerless, while credibility without truth could shape events according to false beliefs rather than divine will. The emergence of Cassandra as a literary figure began within decades of Troy's destruction, as poets and storytellers recognized the dramatic potential of her tragic fate. The earliest references appeared in epic poems that celebrated the Greek victory, while acknowledging the supernatural elements that had shaped the conflict's outcome. These works portrayed her as a figure of both divine favour and cosmic justice, her prophetic abilities serving as evidence of the gods' continued involvement in human affairs, while her suffering demonstrated the terrible consequences that could follow from defying divine will. Aeschylus, the great Athenian tragedian, would later immortalise Cassandra's story in his trilogy The Oresteia, where she appeared as a central figure in the drama surrounding Agamemnon's murder and its aftermath. His portrayal captured both the supernatural accuracy of her prophetic abilities and the psychological torment created by her inability to communicate divine truth effectively to mortal audiences. The playwright's genius lay in his recognition that Cassandra's curse represented a perfect metaphor for the human condition itself. The possession of insights that could prevent tragedy combined with the inability to convince others to act upon those insights before catastrophe struck. The religious dimensions of Cassandra's legacy evolved as her story became integrated into various mystery cults and prophetic traditions throughout the Mediterranean world. Temples dedicated to Apollo began incorporating references to her fate in their teachings about the proper relationship between mortals and divine revelation, using her example to illustrate both the privileges and responsibilities that accompanied prophetic gifts. Her vindication after death served as evidence that divine truth would eventually be recognized regardless of temporary human rejection, providing comfort to contemporary seers whose own warnings met with skepticism or hostility. The cult practices that developed around Cassandra's memory reflected the complex nature of her prophetic legacy, as worshippers sought to honour her accuracy while avoiding the curse that had made her insights ineffective during her lifetime. Rituals designed to commemorate her prophetic abilities included offerings of white doves and laurel branches, symbols associated with Apollo's prophetic domain, while prayers requested that participants be granted the wisdom to recognise divine truth when it was presented to them. These practices acknowledged that the problem lay not with Cassandra's prophetic abilities, but with the human tendency to reject uncomfortable revelations in favour of pleasant delusions. The philosophical implications of Cassandra's story continue to resonate throughout ancient intellectual traditions, as thinkers struggled to understand the relationship between knowledge and suffering that her life had so dramatically illustrated. Stoic philosophers found in her example evidence for their belief that wisdom often brought pain, as those who perceived reality clearly were forced to witness the tragic consequences of others' ignorance and self-deception. Her story supported their argument that philosophical understanding required acceptance of life's inherent tragic dimensions rather than pursuit of comfortable illusions. The Platonic tradition interpreted Cassandra's fate as an allegory for the philosopher's relationship to society, suggesting that those who perceived eternal truths would inevitably find themselves misunderstood by audiences trapped in the shadows of conventional belief. Her prophetic abilities represented the philosopher's capacity to perceive reality beyond appearances, while her curse symbolized society's resistance to insights that challenged established assumptions and comfortable prejudices. This interpretation positioned her as a predecessor to Socrates and other philosophical martyrs whose commitment to truth brought them into fatal conflict with popular opinion. The historical influence of Cassandra's story extended beyond literature and philosophy to affect practical approaches to prophecy and divine communication throughout the ancient world. Her vindication after death provided evidence that supernatural insights could be genuine even when they were universally rejected by contemporary audiences, encouraging later generations to consider prophetic warnings more carefully before dismissing them as impossible or irrelevant. Religious authorities developed more sophisticated methods for evaluating prophetic claims, recognizing that truth and credibility did not always coincide in ways that made divine revelation immediately recognizable. The theme of ignored wisdom that Cassandra embodied became a recurring motif in Western literature and thought, appearing in various forms throughout subsequent centuries as writers and thinkers grappled with similar paradoxes in their own contexts. Her archetypal significance extended beyond her specific prophetic abilities to encompass broader questions about truth, authority, and the social mechanisms that determined which voices were heard and believed. The recognition that she had been vindicated by history provided hope that contemporary voices of warning might eventually be proven correct despite present skepticism or hostility. The legacy of Cassandra ultimately established her as the archetypal figure of the unheeded prophet, whose story would continue to resonate wherever individuals found themselves possessing crucial insights that others refused to acknowledge or accept. Her transformation from cursed victim to vindicated oracle demonstrated that truth possessed its own power independent of contemporary recognition, while her tragic fate served as a perpetual reminder of the human cost incurred when society systematically rejected the voices of warning that might have prevented disaster. In death, she achieved the credibility that had been denied to her in life, becoming an eternal symbol of the terrible gap between knowledge and belief that continues to shape human affairs across all ages and cultures. Her story concluded not with her death in the palace at Mycenae, but with the recognition that her prophetic voice had transcended mortality to become a permanent part of human consciousness. The curse that had silenced her living words could not prevent her posthumous vindication, as the accuracy of her predictions established her as one of history's most authentic prophetic figures. Through the works of the great tragedians and the continuing influence of her archetypal story, Cassandra achieved a form of immortality that Apollo's original gifts had never promised, the eternal remembrance accorded to those whose tragic fate illuminates fundamental truths about the human condition. Her legacy endures as a testament to the power of truth to survive even the most determined attempts to silence it, and as a warning that the voices we dismiss today may prove to be the prophets whose words we should have heeded